Chapter 1600. The first mountain god Zhuowen had stayed in the Azure Dragon Hall for 100 years. During this 100 years, other than staying in the third layer, he would occasionally go to the second layer to meet with his parents and friends. During this 100 years, Lu Hantian and Wu Dai became Dao companions, and Wu Dai became a demon saint. Zhuowen had also completely removed the master-servant relationship between them. Regarding Lu Hantian and Wu Dai, Zhuowen had always had a blissful attitude. Moreover, the two were a good match. After all, both husband and wife had reached the saint realm. The starting point of their children would also be extremely high. Of course, when he often looked at Lu Hantian and Wu Dai, Zhuowen couldn't help but think of Mu Chenxue. During this time, Lu Hantian and Wu Dai both planned to leave the Azure Dragon Hall and go to the Middle Earth, hoping to find their own opportunities there. Both of them had obtained the key to the 9 Nether Conference, and could activate the 9 Nether Great Array to go to the Middle Earth. It was very difficult to become a saint, and it was even more difficult to break through after becoming a saint. Lu Hantian's cultivation had already reached the glimpse profound saint realm, and Wu Dai was a small realm lower than Lu Hantian, reaching the nirvana profound saint realm. However, during this period of time in the Azure Dragon Hall, although their cultivation had increased, they were still far from breaking through. Even Zhuowen, who had reached the shattering profound saint realm, and after 100 years of accumulation, the saint force in his body was much stronger than before, but he was still far from the peak of the shattering profound saint realm. He knew very well that if he wanted to rely on the accumulation of time to break through, it would take nearly 1,000 years for him to reach the peak of the shattering profound saint realm. As for advancing to the heaven saint realm, if he didn't have a specific opportunity, he would probably be stuck in this realm forever. On the path of the saint realm, in addition to talent, one had to spend time. If one didn't want to spend time, then one had to go out and search for opportunities. Without a specific opportunity, it would take a very, very long time to advance through cultivation. It could even take thousands of years, or even tens of thousands of years. Ryuka relied on the Azure Dragon Hall to cultivate a large number of sage-to-be, but the number of sage-to-be was extremely small. Most of these sage-to-be were extremely talented and relied on the vast amount of time in the Azure Dragon Hall to cultivate and become sage-to-be. Moreover, Zhuowen could faintly feel that as the cultivation of the warrior became stronger, the effect of the flow of time contained in the 3 layers of heaven and earth became less and less obvious. Zhuowen knew that the time laws in the Azure Dragon Palace Hall were not without any restrictions. As your cultivation grew stronger and stronger, the effect of the flow of time on you would also become smaller and smaller. Zhuowen estimated that if his strength reached the immortal sage realm, the effect of the time law on him would be completely negated. After all, Taoist master Zhang Long, who created the Azure Dragon Hall, was an immortal sage powerhouse. Even if Taoist master Zhang Long reached the peak of the immortal sage realm, the time law he left in the Azure Dragon Hall was only a trace. A trace of the time law was indeed not very useful for immortal sage-level existences. Therefore, Zhuowen knew very well that it was almost impossible for Ryuka to cultivate a true top sage by relying on the time law of the Azure Dragon Hall. However, as time passed, Zhuowen was confident that the number of profound sages in Ryuka would continue to increase, and it would be very difficult for heaven sages to be born. As for immortal sages, it was almost impossible. Lu Hantian and Wu Dai were also aware of this, so they decided to leave the Azure Dragon Hall and go to the Central Continent to look for their own opportunities. After all, the Central Continent was a place full of mysteries. Heaven sages were not as rare as the 4 major domains, and there were even quite a few immortal sages. It was a paradise for powerhouses. Zhuowen did not stop Lu Hantian and Wu Dai's decision. He knew very well that everyone had their own opportunities. If they were restricted to one place, they would only delay themselves. Wu Dai and Lu Hantian were not the only ones who had obtained the key to the 9 Nether Great Array. Gatha and Long Tian had also obtained it. Zhuowen asked Gatha and Long Tian. Among them, Gatha did not plan to go to the Central Continent. She decided to return to her family with Canaan and guard the seal in the Serene Corpse Extremis. As for Long Tian, he planned to follow Zhuowen. When Zhuan went to the central continent, he would follow. Zhuan was not in a hurry to leave the Azure Dragon Hall for the central continent. He planned to comprehend the laws of the third forbidden area of the 19th mountain before leaving. Zhuan stayed in the Azure Dragon Hall for dozens of years, but the members of the Long family who were investigating outside never found any news about the Ice and Fire clan. It was as if the Ice and Fire clan had suddenly disappeared from the face of the earth. Zhuan knew that the Ice-Fire family should have returned to the central continent. From the Bai Feng's memories, most people in the central continent looked down on the four major domains. In their eyes, the four major domains were insignificant places. There were countless powerhouses in the central continent. Usually, cultivators from that place would not be willing to go to the four major domains. If it were not for the Ice-Fire sacred symbol, the young master of the Ice-Fire family would not have lowered himself to enter the four major domains. Since Zhuan had escaped back then, and the four major domains were so vast, coupled with the fact that the young master of the Ice and Fire family was not familiar with the four major domains, moreover, if Zhuan wanted to hide, the young master of the Ice-Fire family would not be able to find him. Therefore, the young master of the Ice-Fire family gave up on searching for Zhuan and returned to the central continent. However, Zhuan knew that the young master of the Ice-Fire family had already suspected him. He would not let the matter rest. This time, he had to be fully prepared for his trip to the central continent. When he entered the central continent, he had to keep a low profile. Over the next few decades, Zhuan painstakingly entered the third forbidden area of the 19th mountain. The law of the third forbidden area was the law of explosive steps. This law was a speed-type law. It was said that when one mastered this law, one step would be like an explosion. The speed of a cultivator who mastered this law would be so fast that one would be dazzled. Moreover, Zhuan discovered that the law of explosive steps and the law of the void complemented each other. In other words, once the law of explosive steps and the law of the void were combined, he would be able to use explosive steps in the void tunnel. His speed would be much faster. Since the law of explosive steps and the law of the void were somewhat similar, Zhuan did not spend much time to master the law of explosive steps. It only took him about 10 years. Moreover, the third forbidden area was a strange area where the gravity was 100 times higher than the outside world. In this area, Zhuan's great success sacred body had been tempered. What surprised Zhuan even more was that the third forbidden area also had golden thunder bamboo. Moreover, 2 golden thunder bamboo had appeared at once. In addition to the golden thunder bamboo he had obtained in the first forbidden area, Zhuan had a total of 3 golden thunder bamboo. Moreover, the golden thunder bamboo produced golden lightning once every 100 years. This time, Zhuan relied on the terrifying gravity and the golden lightning on the 3 golden thunder bamboo to temper his body to a new height. Boom! Zhuan suddenly clenched his fist, and there was an endless crackling sound. Then he punched the air. The surrounding space was like layers of waves, and countless cracks appeared. An invisible circular wave of air spread out in all directions with Zhuan as the center. Under this mighty force, the entire 19th mountain trembled a few times. It was like a withered bamboo swaying in the wind. What a powerful physique! Just the strength of my physique alone is not inferior to a Sky Saint Realm expert. If I add the power of the laws in my body, I can kill an ordinary Sky Saint Realm expert. Zhuan clenched his fist, and there was a look of surprise in his eyes. Although he had not cultivated the great success sacred body to the peak, it was 1 level higher than before. He had even climbed to another peak because of this. Moreover, I have mastered the 8th law, the law of explosive steps. My speed is much faster than before. Even a heaven-defying Saint Realm expert might be able to defeat me, but it won't be so easy for him to catch up with me. A smile appeared on Zhuowen's face as he took a step forward. Immediately, the space beneath his feet exploded and collapsed. Then he shot out like a puff of smoke. His speed was extremely fast, just like a bolt of black lightning. Every step he took was able to explode with an ear-piercing sound. After mastering the law of explosive steps and improving his great success sacred body, Zhuan was in a very good mood. After he walked out of the 19th mountain, an indifferent voice suddenly sounded. It seems that you have comprehended the law of explosive steps of the third forbidden area. You comprehended it quite quickly this time. Zhuowen's pupils shrank into needles. He suddenly took a step back and retreated hundreds of steps. He stared at the proud figure standing on the shore of the 19th mountain. During the process of walking out of the 19th mountain, he did not notice any trace of the person in front of him. It could be seen that this person was not simple. The first mountain god? The figure in front of him had long hair and a black robe. His face was faintly discernible under the cover of his long hair. It was impossible to see his true appearance. This person quietly leaned against the side of a huge rock on the shore. He did not look at Zhuowen. Instead, he looked to the side as if there was a beautiful scenery there that was worth watching. Zhuowen's gaze was somewhat vigilant. He did not know why the first mountain god had suddenly come to find him. You don't have to be so vigilant. If I wanted to kill you, you would have already become a corpse before you walked out of the 19th mountain, the first mountain god said indifferently. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He regained his calm and said, "Senior first mountain god, why are you looking for me? You are the first inheritor in 10,000 years to completely control the Blue Dragon Hall. Do I have to have something to do with you just to see you?" The first mountain god said unfathomably. Completely control the Blue Dragon Hall? Zhuowen laughed self-deprecatingly. If he truly had complete control of the Azure Dragon Palace, the 18 mountain gods of the third heaven and earth would all listen to his orders. Unfortunately, he did not have the ability to control the third heaven and earth. Chapter 1601. To change form and spirit, the first mountain god naturally saw Zhuowen's self-deprecating expression, but he didn't mind. "I'm here to congratulate you for successfully comprehending the third forbidden area's law of explosive steps. Moreover, I can feel that apart from the first forbidden area's law of desolation, the second forbidden area's law of death, and the third forbidden area's law of explosive steps, there are 5 other laws in your body. In other words, you have comprehended 8 laws in total." Speaking up to here, the first mountain god's expression changed. A person comprehending 8 laws was shocking even to him. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He didn't admit or deny it. Today, the first mountain god suddenly came to find him. This was strange in itself, so he didn't want to say anything unnecessary. "You don't have to be so cautious. I said that I have no ill intentions towards you. You should have heard about me from 18th Elder. With my strength, you are like an ant in front of me." The first mountain god waved his sleeves. 2 rays of light shot out from his sleeves and landed in Zhuowen's palms. They were 2 simple tokens with the numbers 10 and 9 engraved on the surface of the tokens. Holding the tokens, Zhuowen looked at the first mountain god with a puzzled expression. These 2 tokens are the tokens of the 9th mountain god and the 10th mountain god. With these tokens, you can summon the 9th and 10th mountain gods to fight for you. However, there is a limit. You can only use them 3 times. The first mountain god said. Zhuowen was stunned. He didn't expect the first mountain god to give him the tokens of the 9th and 10th mountain gods. This was out of his expectations. At the same time, it made him even more puzzled. Today, the first mountain god came to find him. There were too many suspicious points. He didn't believe that the first mountain god came to find him without a purpose. Zhuowen asked indifferently. "This is your reward for comprehending the law of explosive steps. Comprehending the law of forbidden area is very beneficial for both you and I. In the future, if you can comprehend the law of the 4th forbidden area, I will give you a higher-ranked mountain god token. For someone like you who urgently needs strength, these tokens should be a timely rain." The first mountain god smiled. "I need a specific reason. Otherwise, I won't accept these 2 tokens so easily," Zhuowen said calmly. The first mountain god was too mysterious, so mysterious that he couldn't see through him. He couldn't easily believe in such an existence. The first mountain god wasn't angry. He looked down and said, "Do you know how the third heaven and earth was formed? Or perhaps, in your opinion, the third heaven and earth was created by Taoist Songlong, right?" Zhuowen's eyes slowly narrowed as he replied, "Could it be that there are other secrets? If the 3 heavens and earth were not created by Taoist Songlong, Could it be that it was created by you? In the beginning, the third heaven was indeed created by Taoist Song Long. However, when it was first created, it was not called the third heaven. Instead, it was called the second heaven. At the top of the second heaven, there was a dark prison. The purpose of this prison was to imprison me. However, although I was once defeated by Taoist Song Long, he could only do so much. He didn't have the ability to kill me. Later, Taoist Song Long was seriously injured and disappeared in the catastrophe 10,000 years ago. Only the Azure Dragon Hall was left in hibernation. Although I tried to escape the restrictions of the Azure Dragon Hall, Taoist Song Long had already left a backup plan. Even if he wasn't there, I was still trapped in the sword prison. After staying in the prison for so many years, it was natural for me to feel lonely. In order to get rid of the loneliness, I broke the barrier of the second heaven and chose many creatures with poor aptitudes but strong wills. I also taught them the indestructible divine body of the myriad Tao. Thus, there was the upper realm. About entering the upper realm from the second heaven, it was also from that time that the second heaven began to spread. At this point, the first mountain god stopped and didn't say anything else. However, his gaze was fixed on Zhuan. You were clearly able to freely enter and exit the Azure Dragon Hall without my control. What restrictions could the Azure Dragon Hall have on you? Zhuan sneered. He didn't believe the first mountain god's words at all. The first mountain god glanced at Zhuan indifferently and said, "That's because you're too weak. You can't refine the third heaven at all. If your strength was comparable to Taoist Song Long back then, you could forcefully refine it. Thus, I don't need your permission to enter and exit the Azure Dragon Hall freely. However, that's all. Even if I can enter and exit the third heaven, I can't go more than 1,000 meters away from the Azure Dragon Hall. Otherwise, I'll trigger the restriction that Taoist Song Long placed on me. This is the backup plan that Taoist Song Long left for me. If it wasn't for this backup plan, a mere third heaven wouldn't be able to trap me." Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He didn't completely believe the first mountain god's words. He knew that there must be some truth and some lies in it. However, the first mountain god should have been a formidable opponent of Taoist Song Long back then. Otherwise, Taoist Song Long wouldn't have been unable to kill him and could only trap him in the Azure Dragon Hall. Does this have anything to do with the forbidden area of the 19th mountain? Zhuan asked calmly. Of course it has something to do with it. The 19th mountain is the core of the restriction that Taoist Song Long placed on me. To tell you the truth, if you comprehend all the laws of the 6 forbidden areas of the 19th mountain and combine them together, you'll obtain a key. This key is the key to breaking the restriction on me. I've sent many people into the forbidden areas in the past. However, most of them died in the first forbidden area. Only a few managed to enter the second forbidden area. As for the third forbidden area, you're the first in history. Speaking of this, the first mountain god's eyes burned with passion. He looked at Zhuan and continued, "I see hope in you. That's why I've come to you. What good will it do for me if I help you escape?" Zhuowen sneered. The first mountain god remained calm and said, "Don't be in a hurry to reject my offer. My offer is a win-win situation. It's beneficial to both of us. The laws of the Forbidden Zone and the things inside will be of great benefit to you. Moreover, after I escape, the remaining 17 mountain gods will all be under your command. They will listen to your orders, and you will be able to easily refine the third world. Isn't this the best of both worlds? I know you're a smart man. Also, you don't have to think about controlling me. Even Taoist Song Long couldn't do it, let alone you." Zhuowen's eyes flickered. Without a doubt, the first mountain god's offer was indeed tempting to Zhuan. Just as the first mountain god had said, with the first mountain god's unfathomable strength, it was indeed difficult for him to control him. After all, even Taoist Song Long couldn't subdue the first mountain god. However, he always felt that the first mountain god was a little strange. It was his intuition. "If you think I'm not reliable, I can swear on my life that as long as you cooperate with me and help me escape, I won't attack you. Furthermore, I'll do my best to help you during this period. This is already the biggest concession I can make," the first mountain god said sincerely. Zhuan fell silent. The first mountain god didn't rush him. He leaned against the cliff and silently waited for Zhuowen's reply. After about an hour, Yuan took a deep breath and said, "If what you said is correct, I can cooperate with you. Of course, if one of us goes against the original intention of cooperation, we'll both die. Let's make a contract. It'll be safer that way." As he spoke, Yuan bit his thumb and quickly drew a blood-red pattern in the air. The first mountain god smiled faintly. With a light stroke of his finger, he imprinted his blood essence into the blood-red pattern. The blood-red pattern split into two and flew to their chests. If one looked closely, they both had the same blood-red pattern on their chests. "Now you know my sincerity, right?" The first mountain god smiled and extended his hand. "I hope we'll have a pleasant cooperation from now on." Yuan also extended his hand and shook the first mountain god's hand with an expressionless face. "In order to celebrate our cooperation, I'll give you another gift." The first mountain god waved his sleeve and a jade slip fell into Zhuowen's palm. "I see that you've cultivated both your physique and Dantian Saint energy. Although your talent and luck are not bad, cultivating both at the same time will only delay your cultivation. In this jade slip, there's a secret skill called shape-shifting technique. When cultivating this technique, you can split yourself into two. One of them will cultivate your physique while the other will cultivate your Dantian and Sea of Consciousness. Both of them will not affect each other, but they can be combined together," the first mountain god said faintly. Yuan was stunned. He placed the jade slip between his eyebrows. About half an hour later, his eyes were filled with surprise. He carefully read through the secret technique called body-shifting technique, and his heart was filled with astonishment. Shape-shifting technique could be considered as an external incarnation skill. However, it was very different from an ordinary external incarnation skill. A warrior who cultivated such a mystic technique could split the different cultivation energies in the warrior's body. For example, Zhuowen cultivated both the physical body and the law of Saint Power. However, if he cultivated this mystic technique, he could split into two clones based on this characteristic of his. One of the clones would focus on his physique while the other would focus on the law of Saint energy. Moreover, the cultivation of the two clones would not affect each other. When the two clones were combined, there would be no sense of disharmony. The combination of the two clones would be like his own body. Just as the first mountain god said, Yuan cultivated both his physique and the law of Saint energy. However, he only had one body. To cultivate both, he had to stagger the time. This would undoubtedly delay Zhuowen's time and cultivation progress. However, the shape-shifting technique easily solved this problem for Zhuowen. After cultivating this secret skill, Zhuowen could divide himself into two clones and cultivate at the same time. Chapter 1602. Dao meaning moreover, the external incarnation that Zhuowen cultivated through form displacement technique was different from the Buddha and devil avatars that Zhuowen had formed with the Buddha devil eye. The Buddha and demon avatars were only suitable for practicing the Buddha and demon cultivation method. Moreover, there were many limitations. After Zhuowen had reached the sage realm, he had completely activated the Buddha demon eye's power. The Buddha and demon avatars had returned to their original state and turned back into the Buddha demon eye. Moreover, the Buddha demon eye had activated the Buddha's 9 kowtows to heaven and the demon's 10 perilous lands. With Zhuowen's awareness, he had only comprehended the Buddha's 9 kowtows to heaven and the demon's 10 perilous lands. The further he progressed, the more difficult it would be to comprehend. As for the form displacement technique, it was a technique that separated one body into two, allowing one to cultivate two different cultivation methods at the same time. It could be said that this greatly increased Zhuowen's cultivation efficiency. Moreover, in the records of this jade slip, not only was there the secret technique of the external avatar transformation, there was also a body-tempering medicinal formula called the Gold Lightning Body Tempering Slurry. The external avatar technique can greatly increase your cultivation efficiency. You should have seen the Golden Lightning Body Tempering Slurry's formula, right? This thing has a good effect on your cultivation of the great success Saint Body, the first mountain god said indifferently. Zhuowen carefully looked at the Golden Lightning Body Tempering Slurry and found that the main ingredient of the formula was the Golden Lightning Bamboo. There were many precious elixirs in the formula. Moreover, according to the introduction, The golden lightning body tempering slurry had a great effect on the great success saint body. It was said that the medicinal effect could last until the pinnacle of the great success saint body. Of course, if he wanted to rely on the golden lightning body tempering slurry to cultivate the great success saint body to the pinnacle, he would need a large amount of the golden lightning body tempering slurry. From the formula, it could be seen that 1 golden lightning bamboo was enough to refine 1 portion of the golden lightning body tempering slurry. Moreover, 1 portion of the golden lightning body tempering slurry could be used for a long time. I wonder if the external avatar technique can split into 3? Zhuan couldn't help but turn his head and ask. The first mountain god squinted his eyes and said calmly, "It seems like you want to create another clone to cultivate your mental energy? Under normal circumstances, one can only split into 2, but there is an exception. If you trust me, I can help you split into 3. Since we have already reached a cooperative relationship, how can I not believe you?" Zhuan smirked. The number 1 mountain god was unfathomable. Since the 2 of them had already reached an agreement, there was no reason for him to take advantage of him. With the first mountain god's cunning mind, he naturally guessed Zhuan's thoughts. However, he did not care. If Zhuan became stronger, it would only be beneficial to him. During this period of time, you can cultivate on the shore of the 19th mountain. I will personally guide you. I will do my best to help you split into 3. The first mountain god said calmly. Zhuan did not say anything. He sat on the shore and began to silently comprehend the external avatar technique in the jade slip. As for the golden lightning body tempering slurry's formula, he used the communication jade slip to inform Long Xiaotian so that he could help him collect the medicinal ingredients for the formula. Time passed slowly. Zhuan sat cross-legged on the shore of the 19th mountain. The first mountain god silently leaned against the cliff like a statue. Of course, if one observed carefully, the first mountain god would often use his divine will to observe Zhuan's situation. He would also use the secret sound transmission to inform Zhuan of the secret to cultivating the external avatar technique. He would also point out where Zhuan's cultivation went wrong. With the first mountain god's personal guidance, Zhuan cultivated the external avatar technique at an extremely fast speed. In the 10th year, Zhuan created his first clone. The first doppelganger looked exactly like Zhuan. The first doppelganger had separated the energy of Zhuan's physical body. This doppelganger had inherited Zhuan's great success holy body. In other words, the power of Zhuan's saint body was transferred to this first clone. The physique of Zhuan's original body was exactly the same as an ordinary warrior's. After the power of the saint body was separated, Zhuan's strength was obviously much weaker than before. In the past, he could kill a Sky Saint Realm warrior and contend with a heaven-defying Saint Realm warrior by relying on the power of the saint body and the precept. But now, just by relying on the saint force in his dantian and the 8 precepts that he had comprehended, his combat strength still surpassed a warrior of the same level. However, he could only be compared to a Sky Yin Saint Realm warrior. As for a Sky Sun Saint Realm warrior, he would probably need the power of the Buddha demon eye. Of course, the separation of the first clone was only to increase the efficiency of his cultivation. The form swap could be reversed. He could integrate the first clone into his original body and double his combat strength. After separating the first clone, Zhuan did not stop cultivating. Instead, he tried to separate the second clone. The first mountain god, who was watching from the side, also had a solemn expression. He knew very well that the difficulty of separating the second clone was much more difficult than the first clone. Zhuan spent a total of 50 years to create his second clone before he finally managed to create it with great difficulty. The second clone was wearing an Arcanist's loose robe. It focused on mind power cultivation. Zhuan only needed to order the 2 clones to cultivate using his main sea of consciousness. Looking at the 2 clones standing in front of him, Zhuan smiled. In the end, he still relied on form swap to separate the 2 clones. Of course, this was mainly due to the first mountain god. If the first mountain god hadn't pointed out many misconceptions during his cultivation, Zhuan wouldn't have been able to create 2 clones. At most, he would only be able to create 1. I've already helped you split 1 clone into 3. It's time for me to leave. However, I hope you can remember my promise. It's best if you can comprehend the laws of the remaining forbidden areas as soon as possible. Also, you might not know this, but once you comprehend more than 10 laws, you will have the opportunity to sublimate and come into contact with the illusory Tao meaning. The first mountain god slowly turned his head, leaving Zhuo with an imposing back view as he spoke with a profound tone. Tao meaning? What's that? Zhuo frowned and asked curiously. This thing is illusory. It's a power of a deeper level that surpasses the laws. The origin of the dragon soul in your body is not simple. If it knows, you'll know by asking. Also, you should take a good look at the last level of the Qi method pavilion. Perhaps the Qi methods and secret techniques inside are of no use to the current you. However, you have overlooked one place. The things inside will definitely be of unimaginable help to you. The first mountain god's voice slowly sounded in Zhuowen's ears. After that, he completely disappeared in front of Zhuon. Zhuon did not even notice how the first mountain god left. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. Could it be that the last level of the techniques pavilion still hides some secrets? Zhuowen's gaze fell on the endless sea outside the 19th mountain. He frowned slightly. The first mountain god's last words were a kind of reminder. Kid, you can't completely trust the first mountain god's words. His words are half true and half false. Xiaohei landed on Zhuowen's shoulder and said cautiously. I know that. Jun nodded and asked, Xiaohei, the first mountain god mentioned Tao meaning before. What is this Tao meaning? Tao meaning. This thing is illusory and indistinct, and it's usually very difficult to explain. Only when you personally experience it will you know. What the first mountain god said is also correct. If you really comprehend more than 10 laws, then you will indeed have the opportunity to come into contact with Tao intent. But I can only say that if you've really comprehended Tao insight, then that Tao insight will instantly double or even multiply your overall strength, said Xiaohei. Double or even multiply my overall strength. Is it that exaggerated? Zhuon was completely shocked. Tao meaning could increase one's overall strength. And this overall strength was the strength that one would have after using all of their trump cards. Take Zhuowen as an example. Even after using all of his trump cards, he was still able to kill a Sky Saint Realm expert. If he had the support of Tao meaning, he might be able to kill a heaven-defying Saint Realm expert directly. Moreover, Tao meaning was really powerful for cultivators. If a celestial Saint Realm cultivator had Tao meaning, even if it only doubled his strength, it would be many times more powerful than before. Without a doubt, Tao meaning was much more terrifying and useful than laws. Moreover, the stronger one's strength was, the more terrifying the amplification of Tao meaning would be. A celestial saint's strength doubled was much more powerful than a heavenly saint's strength doubled. Of course. However, it is very difficult to comprehend Tao meaning. The conditions are also extremely harsh. Currently, it is publicly acknowledged that one has to comprehend more than 10 laws to have a chance to come into contact with Tao meaning. Of course, there are other ways to comprehend Tao meaning other than this method. Of course, the conditions are also extremely harsh. Xiaohei shook her head and said. Zhuowen felt relieved in his heart when he heard this. However, he was rather fervent towards the Tao insight in his heart. The increase in overall strength was extremely tempting to him. No matter how high his cultivation was, this thing would be of great help to him. At present, I have only comprehended 8 laws. There are still 2 more to reach 10. I am afraid it is a bit too early to think about Tao meaning. Let's go to the cultivation technique pavilion first. Since the first mountain god said that there are secrets there, I will go and have a look. Zhuon shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. After catching up with Lowe's, Mai's, and Lu Si in the 3rd heaven, he left the 3rd heaven. On the last floor of the cultivation technique pavilion, Yun looked around at the rows of shelves. These shelves were filled with jade slips. However, Yun had already browsed through the cultivation techniques in these jade slips. They were not particularly helpful to him. After all, the power of Zhuowen's great success divine body was too terrifying. One strength could break 10,000 techniques. All cultivation techniques were not very useful to Zhuon. Because of this, he rarely entered the cultivation technique pavilion. This time, if it were not for the first mountain god's reminder, he would not have entered again. After walking around, Yuan did not find anything unusual. He frowned slightly. There shouldn't be any places that I didn't find. Yuan muttered in a low voice. His gaze fell on the table in the center, where there was an incense burner emitting a faint fragrance. Every time this incense burner comes in, it releases sandalwood fragrance. Is the sandalwood fragrance in here endless? No, this incense burner is strange. Chapter 1603. Ascending the heavens, descending the yellow springs, something is indeed strange. Feeling the unmoving incense burner on the table, Zhuowen's eyes flashed. He did not continue to try to pull out the incense burner, but silently observed it. After about half an incense stick's time, Zhuowen once again stretched out his hand and gently twisted the surface of the incense burner. Soon after, there was the sound of a mechanism turning. A row of shelves on the north side slowly separated. Behind the shelves, there was a small hole that was a few feet long and wide. In the small hole, there was a bronze statue. The bronze statue's appearance was that of an evil spirit bearing its fangs and brandishing its claws. Sharp fangs, long claws, and ghost eyes that glowed with a bloody light. Zhuan could not help but frown. This bronze statue gave him an extremely strange feeling. Moreover, the surface of this evil spirit statue was covered with bloodstains. Zhuan could faintly smell a trace of blood. These bloodstains were not painted with paint, but real dried blood. What is this thing? Looking at the evil spirit in front of him, Zhuan was slightly unhappy. However, he still stretched out his hand and took the evil spirit statue in his hand. Suddenly, the evil spirit's eyes suddenly blinked. Soon after, a cruel laughter resounded in Zhuowen's ears. Enter the yellow springs, only slaughter. Those who have committed grave sins and killed countless people can enter the yellow springs and obtain supreme power. Following the cruel laughter, Zhuowen faintly heard these somewhat strange words. After these words echoed in Zhuowen's mind several times, the evil spirit statue in Zhuowen's hand suddenly floated in midair. Then, under Zhuowen's astonished gaze, it suddenly collapsed and turned into a long stream of green. This long stream of green was like a spirit snake that constantly slithered in midair. If one looked closely, this long stream of green was like ink, drawing some kind of characters in midair. These characters formed a rich content. Slaughtering finger of the yellow springs? What kind of secret technique is this? Zhuan stared blankly at the runes formed by the cyan stream. This is not a secret technique, but a supreme immortal technique. Sure enough, there is indeed an immortal technique in the Azure Dragon Palace. I was a little puzzled before. It turns out that the immortal technique is hidden in such a secretive place. Xiao He flew out of the sea of consciousness and stood on Zhuowen's shoulder. She stared at the characters in midair, and her little eyes showed an unprecedented seriousness. Immortal technique? Zhuan narrowed his eyes and revealed a trace of seriousness. He had naturally heard of celestial arts. It was said that celestial arts were extremely rare. Some celestial arts existed innately, while others were created after birth. However, they all had one thing in common, and that was that their power was extremely terrifying. And how rare were immortal techniques? From the Baifeng's memory, Zhuan knew that even in the central region, only those extremely powerful forces possessed immortal spells. Moreover, even in a powerful force, the number of immortal spells was extremely limited. It was the kind that could be counted with one hand. Zhuan, the immortal technique is very powerful. If you learn this immortal technique, your strength will rise again, and this immortal technique will become your strongest trump card. Xiao He could not help but be moved. Although Zhuan looked calm on the surface, his heart was like a raging storm. He was extremely agitated, and even his right hand began to tremble. Although Zhuan had never seen an immortal technique with his own eyes, just from the Baifeng's memory, he could vaguely feel how terrifying and powerful the immortal technique was. Thinking of this, Zhuan memorized the runes in midair word by word in his mind. Moreover, as a precaution, he even engraved the contents in a jade slip. The threshold to cultivate the slaughtering finger of Netherworld is extremely low. I think you only need to cultivate it for 3 days to master it. Of course, the price to pay is that the slaughtering finger of Netherworld has almost no power at all. Xiao He knew more about immortal techniques than Zhuan. With a glance, she could see the pros and cons of the immortal technique in front of her. After Xiao He's reminder, Zhuan carefully looked at the slaughtering finger of Netherworld again. It was indeed as Xiao He had said. The threshold to cultivate this immortal technique was so low that it made Zhuan feel a little ashamed. However, the slaughtering finger of Netherworld had a special characteristic. It was that the further one cultivated it, the more terrifying its power would be. It was said that the slaughtering finger of Netherworld required continuous killing. Moreover, it was best to kill people who had committed heinous crimes and were unpardonably evil. If one killed a heinous criminal, the slaughtering finger of Netherworld would automatically absorb all the sins of the heinous criminal, forming the embryonic form of the Netherworld. When the number of sinful people killed increased, the yellow springs would also grow larger. And the larger the yellow springs was, the more powerful the yellow springs finger of massacre would become. It could be said that although the threshold to cultivate the slaughtering finger of Netherworld was very low, and its power was not strong in the beginning, as the Netherworld was condensed in the later stages, the power of the slaughtering finger of Netherworld would become extremely terrifying. This immortal technique was extremely malleable. As long as the Netherworld grew larger, the power of the slaughtering finger of Netherworld would become stronger. Let's cultivate the slaughtering finger of Netherworld first. Thinking of this, Zhuan sat cross-legged and began to recall the incantation of the slaughtering finger of Netherworld in his mind. 3 days later, Zhuan abruptly opened his eyes. He pointed a finger at the air with his right hand. Instantly, an invisible force spread out in all directions like a dense spiderweb. Ascend to the heavens and descend to the underworld. Swoosh! Behind Zhuan, a large amount of Netherworld water gushed out. However, this Netherworld water was only an illusion and its power was limited. But even if its power was limited, the power of the slaughtering finger of Netherworld was far more terrifying than ordinary cultivation techniques. It had greatly increased Zhuan's strength. If I want to increase the power of the slaughtering finger of Netherworld, it seems that I have to find some heinous criminals and experiment with them. Zhuan's eyes flickered as he muttered to himself. Father has gathered all the materials for the gold lightning body tempering slurry? Zhuan flipped his right hand and a communication jade slip appeared in his palm. Long Xiaoyan's voice came from it. After leaving the cultivation technique pavilion, Zhuan re-entered the second layer of heaven and earth. Long Xiaotian and Feng Xiao stood quietly in a pavilion as they waited for Zhuan. I have already gathered all the herbs for the prescription you gave me. I have to say that many of the herbs in your prescription are rare herbs that I have never heard of. If I didn't go to the elixir room to search, I wouldn't have been able to gather all these herbs. Long Xiaotian waved his right hand and threw a spirit ring to Zhuan. He continued, furthermore, even in the Azure Dragon Hall's elixir room, I only managed to find one set of the rare medicinal ingredients in those prescriptions. Zhuan took the spirit ring and checked it. Indeed, all the herbs for the gold lightning body tempering slurry were gathered inside. Originally, Zhuan planned to gather 3 sets. After all, he had 3 gold lightning bamboos. But since there was only one set of some herbs in the elixir room, he could only give up. Perhaps I should go to the Middle Earth to take a look at some of the rare herbs. However, these herbs are enough to refine one set of gold lightning body tempering slurry. Speaking up to here, Zhuan looked at Long Xiaoyan and said, Father, it's been hard on you this time. What's the point of saying this between us? What do you plan to do next? Are you preparing to go to the Middle Earth? Long Xiaotian waved his hand. Zhuan nodded and said in a deep voice, Yes, I am indeed preparing to go to the Middle Earth. I must find a Saint Celestial Master to heal the wound on Chen Shui's soul. Long Xiaotian and Feng Xiao looked at each other and sighed. They were speechless. Although their family was finally reunited, they didn't expect that something like this would happen in the end. They really felt helpless. Father, Mother, do you want to go to the Middle Earth with me? Zhuan looked at Long Xiaotian and Feng Xiao and asked. Unexpectedly, Long Xiaolon shook his head and said, "Your mother and I don't plan to go to the Middle Earth. Father is already satisfied with saving Xiao. I only want to stay with Xiao." Hearing this, Yuan was silent for a moment. In the end, he agreed with Long Xiaotian and Feng Xiao's decision. He knew that his father and mother had been separated for more than 20 years. They didn't want to experience a homeless life and didn't have any great ambitions. Although the world in the Azure Dragon Hall wasn't small, it was still a small world. Compared to the 4 major regions, it was still lacking. It was more suitable for the two of them to stay in the 4 major regions. Moreover, there were countless experts in the Middle Earth. They didn't know what would happen if they went there. Zhuowen also didn't want his parents to take such a big risk. In the end, Yuan left Ryuka to Long Xiaotian, Feng Xiao, and Long Xiangding. They stayed in the 4 major regions together, while Zhuowen took the Azure Dragon Hall and prepared to go to the Middle Earth. Zhuowen was very clear that the Azure Dragon Hall might be able to cultivate individual profound sages, but it was almost as difficult as ascending to the heavens to produce a heaven sage. Back then, Long Xiaolon also relied on various opportunities to become a heaven sage. After that, no one else became a heaven sage. The help that profound sages could provide to Zhuowen was extremely limited. Therefore, even if he brought Ryuka to the Middle Earth, it would be useless. It was better to leave Ryuka in the 4 major regions. With Ryuka's current foundation and strength, it was enough to unify the 4 major regions and become the overlord outside of the Middle Earth. Zhuowen also moved the Excellent Gods Academy back to its original location in the Divine Spectre realm. He knew that since the Icefire family had pointed the spearhead of suspicion at him, it was unlikely that they would pay attention to the Excellent Gods Academy. Instead, they would always pay attention to Zhuowen. In this trip to the Middle Earth, Zhuowen would be especially careful and cautious. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Lu Hantian and Wu Dai had already gone to the Middle Earth, while Jian Nand and Gatha had returned to their family. Therefore, Zhuowen's only friends in the Azure Dragon Hall were Mo Lingtian and Mo Yanwusha. Yuan, I have already become Dao companions with senior sister Su Lingping. We are preparing to become elders of the Excellent Gods Academy and guard the academy together. Moreover, I don't have the key to the 9 underworld's great array on me. After leaving these words, Mo Lingtian simply left. Chapter 1604. 9 Serenity's Great Array. Moyan Wushang stared at the back of the man in front of her. She bit her lower lip and tears welled up in her eyes. Her heart was filled with helplessness and grievances. She was very clear that the gap between her and the man in front of her was getting bigger and bigger. His heart was not with her, but with Mu Chenxue. Wushang, what do you plan to do next? Zhuowen slowly turned his head and stared at the woman in front of him. He sighed. Moyan Wushang forced a smile and said, I haven't reached the Saint Realm yet. I know that with my talent, I'm afraid I'll never reach the half-Saint Realm. I don't have the qualifications to enter the Central Continent. I plan to stay in Ryuka in the 4 great regions. After saying this, Moyan Wushang smiled. She waved her hand and a zither appeared in front of her. She slowly stroked the zither and said softly, Before you leave, can I play a song for you? Just like the song elder sister Chen Shui played for you in the past, this parting song will be something you will remember in your heart. Zhuowen stared deeply at Moyan Wushang and finally sat down cross-legged on the ground. Moyan Wushang revealed a smile. She slowly stroked the zither and her fingers moved like flowing water. The melodious sound of the zither, the sorrowful tune, the sorrow of parting, were all slowly interpreted in this song. Drip. Tears streaked across her eyes and a teardrop fell on the zither. Moyan Wushang's eyelids trembled. She smiled and cried as she looked at Zhuowen. She said softly, Goodbye. I hope you won't forget this song. I also hope that when you're tired in the Central Continent, you can return to the 4 great regions. At that time, you can bring Sister Chen Shui back and I'll play another song to celebrate. After saying this, Moyan Wushang carried the zither and left. Looking at the departing figure, Zhuowen's heart was filled with emotions. But he knew that it was time for them to part. Moyan Wushang didn't have the key to the 9 Serenity's great array, and she was too weak. The Central Plains was too dangerous for her. Although Zhuan could bring Moyan Wushang into the Azure Dragon Palace, he didn't do so. He knew very well that in the Middle Earth, the law of the jungle was even crueler than in the 4 major regions. Even he might not be able to stand firm in such a place, let alone Moyan of war. If one day Zhuan were to die in the Central Plains, he would implicate Moyan Wushang in the Azure Dragon Hall. Therefore, Zhuan decided not to bring Moyan Wushang to the Central Plains. Zhuan sat cross-legged for a long time before he finally stood up slowly. He looked up at the distant horizon and said in a low voice, "All good things must come to an end. If we are fated, we will naturally meet again one day. If we are not, then we will be strangers." After he finished speaking, Zhuan took a step forward and instantly vanished on the spot. At this moment, he had already made arrangements for the 4 major regions. Now, he had no more worries. It was time for him to head to the Central Plains. In the depths of the vast 9 Serenities sky, a long rainbow streaked across. Finally, the rainbow stopped on a meteorite that was as huge as a planet. A slender figure appeared. Zhuan flipped his right hand and a golden shuttle-shaped object appeared in his palm. It emitted a dazzling golden light. The golden light became more and more intense. Finally, it turned into a golden line and shot out towards the depths of the dark and cold 9 Serenities sky. It seems that the 9 Serenities great array should be in the depths of the 9 Serenities sky. Zhuan muttered in a low voice. His feet were like the wind as he stepped in the air and shot out like a bolt of lightning. The purple lightning wings on his back unfurled and his speed immediately increased to another level. He instantly disappeared from where he stood. In the depths of the 9 Serenities sky, there was an endless amount of meteorites floating in the void. The distance between the meteorites was extremely short, as if they were stuck together. As the meteorites in the meteorite pile were too close to each other, there would occasionally be meteorites that were extremely close to each other colliding and causing dazzling sparks to erupt. Zhuan, who had mastered the laws of the void, was like a fish in water in the dense meteorite pile. He was as fast as lightning. There is an extremely powerful suction force in the center of the meteorite pile. The moment Zhuan entered the meteorite pile, his eyes narrowed. He could feel a powerful suction force in the center of the meteorite pile. It was this suction force that caused the meteorite pile to rotate in a clockwise direction. The void! Zhuan stepped into the void and dodged a meteorite that was flying towards him. In about 10 minutes, Zhuan had arrived at the center of the meteorite pile. In the middle of the meteorite pile, there was a huge array formation that stood erect. On the surface of the formation, there were 9 huge exotic beasts of different shapes and sizes. These 9 exotic beasts were constructed from black ores that resembled black iron. The 9 strange beasts all opened their bloody mouths, and within their mouths, there was the brilliance of a restrictive formation. Within the mouths of the 9 exotic beasts was the core teleportation formation of the 9 Serenities Great Formation. Zhuan discovered that 7 of the 9 exotic beasts' mouths were dim and almost dim. He knew that these dim lights meant that the formations in the mouths of the 7 exotic beasts had already been used. If he wanted to activate the teleportation formation again, it would probably take a long time. Long Tian. Zhuan waved his sleeve, and a burly young man appeared in front of Zhuan. He knelt on one knee and said, "Long Tian greets my lord. Take out your key. This is the 9 Serenities Great Formation in front of us. Let's enter together." Zhuan said indifferently. Long Tian looked at the 9 exotic beasts in front of him, and a strange look appeared in his eyes. He knelt on one knee and said excitedly, "Thank you, Lord Long Wen." Long Tian took out the key and followed Zhuan into the mouths of the remaining 2 exotic beasts. However, before entering the mouths of the exotic beasts, Zhuan used the 100 transformation divine art in advance to change his appearance and aura, turning into a young man with a zombie face. The instant the 2 of them placed their keys into a groove in the exotic beast's mouth, the exotic beast seemed to have come to life. Its gaping mouth actually closed abruptly. Zhuan only felt his vision go black, and then his mind felt a little dizzy, as if he was in a space-time tunnel. This feeling of dizziness lasted for an unknown amount of time. When Zhuan slowly opened his eyes, he found himself in a valley, and a clamor sounded in his ears. This valley was extremely deep, and the surrounding rock walls were blood-red in color. Even the soil under Zhuan's feet was blood-red in color. However, Zhuan raised his head to look at the sky again. He discovered that the sky was no longer blue, but had a faint trace of blood red. It was as if the sky was dyed with blood, and it looked extremely strange. "Sir, is this the Central Plains?" Long Tian slowly walked to Zhuan's side and looked around at the strange valley. He couldn't help but ask Zhuan in a low voice. "If the Nine Serenities Great Formation is correct, this should be the Central Plains. However, I can't tell where in the Central Plains this is." Zhuan shook his head and said somewhat helplessly. At this moment, Zhuan withdrew his gaze from the surrounding terrain and immediately focused on the source of the clamor in the valley. The source of the noise was in the center of the valley. A group of extraordinarily mighty blood-armored soldiers stood there. At this moment, the group of soldiers stared at Zhuan with some mockery in their eyes. They pointed and even laughed at him from time to time. At this moment, Zhuan also noticed that there was a blood-red formation several meters wide beneath his feet. At this moment, slivers of blood-red light appeared on the surface of the formation, and the light gradually dimmed. It seemed that the blood-red formation was the teleportation formation in the Central Plains, and it was also the destination of the Nine Serenities Great Formation. 2 rookies from the 4 major regions? I wonder where in the 4 major regions they're from? The 2 blood-armored soldiers slowly walked forward. Their eyes were filled with mockery, and their voices were filled with ill intentions. "He, Qian Liang and Gu Yun are preparing to bully the rookies again. I really don't know why the 2 of them are so keen on bullying the rookies. Could it be that you don't know? When Qian Liang and Gu Yun first came to the Central Plains, they were bullied miserably, and all their belongings were taken away. Now that the 2 of them finally became soldiers guarding the teleportation formation, how could they let go of such a good opportunity to bully the rookies?" That's right. In any case, the rookies who just came from the 4 major regions aren't very strong. Qian Liang and Gu Yun should go up and teach the 2 of them a lesson so that they can remember. In the center of the valley, the group of blood-armored soldiers grinned as they watched this scene. They knew that the 2 rookies who had just arrived were going to suffer. Of course, these blood-armored soldiers had experienced this kind of suffering when they first came to the Central Plains, so at this moment, they were all gloating. Looking at Qian Liang and Gu Yun, who were harboring ill intentions, Zhuan narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "Don't tell me that we have the obligation to report our origins after being teleported here?" The cultivation of Qian Liang and Gu Yun wasn't bad. They had both reached the profound Void Saint realm. Moreover, and was even more shocked to find that the cultivation of the other blood-armored soldiers were all in the profound Void Saint realm. Although the profound Void Saint realm was the lowest realm in the profound Sage realm, they were still sages. Such existences would be considered the upper echelons of the major forces in the 4 major regions, but here, they were merely guards of the teleportation formation. After discovering this, Zhuan realized that the strength of the Central Plains had somewhat exceeded his imagination. Even the gatekeepers were sages. Could it be that every cultivator in the Central Plains was a sage? Of course, Zhuan's idea was somewhat unreliable. In the Central Plains, there were even more cultivators who had yet to enter the sage realm, and this kind of position guarding a transmission array was relatively good. Moreover, the minimum requirement was to become a profound sage. Chapter 1605. Blood Refinement Manner. Oh, this newcomer is quite stubborn this time. But I quite like him. The more stubborn a newcomer is, the more I want to teach him a lesson. Gu Yun chuckled. Qian Liang spoke in a neutral tone. Brother Gu is right. I like newcomers like this. My lord, do you want me to teach these 2 fellows a lesson? Long Tian spoke in a low voice. Give each of them 20 slaps. Zhuan spoke indifferently. Long Tian nodded. Gu Yun and Qian Liang stared at Zhuan with strange gazes, and then they roared with laughter. You really are a newcomer that doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. A mere piece of trash from the 4 regions wants you to slap us? You're really making us laugh our heads off. However, Gu Yun and Qian Liang's laughter didn't continue for long because Long Tian had already transformed into a shadow. He blasted out with his palm, and it swiftly descended onto Gu Yun's face. Slap. Gu Yun was utterly unable to see Long Tian's figure clearly, and he only felt pain on his face. After that, he was directly slapped to the point his entire body was sent flying, and he floated in midair like a rootless duckweed. Rumble. It wasn't long before Gu Yun crashed heavily onto the ground, causing it to crack apart. On the other hand, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, and his cheeks swelled up while his gaze dimmed. Sump. Qian Liang retreated repeatedly. Long Tian's speed was too swift, and he didn't even see Long Tian's figure clearly before he noticed to his astonishment that Gu Yun who was beside him had been slapped, and Gu Yun had even spat out blood and fallen to the ground. My lord said 20 slaps. Long Tian was very meticulous. He lifted Gu Yun up from the ground and slapped him mercilessly. Instantly, the sound of slapping could be heard. Gu Yun's face was swollen like a pig's head. His cheeks were swollen and no one could recognize his face. Long Tian had obtained a lot of saint luck from the 9 Underworld Conference. In addition, Yun had deliberately nurtured him with many good resources from the Azure Dragon Hall. In addition, Long Tian's aptitude was really good, so Long Tian's cultivation had already reached the 3rd mystic, the glimpse profound saint realm. With Long Tian's cultivation, taking care of Gu Yun and Qian Liang, these 2 void profound saints, was as easy as lifting up a chicken. Prying profound saint realm. Qian Liang's mouth was agape as his pupils constricted to the size of needles, and he revealed a trace of disbelief. He never imagined that there would actually be an existence with such a terrifying cultivation from the 4 territories. Although it wasn't that such a cultivator had never appeared before, the probability of this happening was very low. After all, the 4 territories had teleportation arrays, and a certain number of cultivators would be teleported over every once in a while. Most of these cultivators who were teleported over were half-step saints, and a few were in the Void Profound Saint Realm. Those who surpassed the Void Profound Saint Realm were very rare. But now, Long Tian was a powerful glimpse Profound Saint Realm cultivator. Moreover, this Long Tian seemed to be the servant of the young man with the zombie face. If the servant alone was so powerful, then how powerful would the young man with the zombie face be? He's actually a glimpse Profound Saint Realm cultivator. This time, he really kicked an iron plate. The other blood-armored soldiers, who were originally standing in the central area of the valley, all had solemn expressions and shock in their eyes. My lord, Gu Yun and I were just joking just now. Please don't blame us. I apologize to you. I hope that my lord can be magnanimous and forgive this lowly one this time. Qian Liang was extremely quick-witted. He hurriedly lowered his posture and apologized to Zhuo Wen and Long Tian with a fawning smile on his face. Long Tian stopped and turned to look at Zhuo Wen with an inquiring look in his eyes. 20 slaps. Zhuo Wen's eyes were indifferent as he said slowly. After receiving Zhuo Wen's reply, Long Tian kicked out. His figure was like lightning as he swept in front of Qian Liang in an instant. Qian Liang roared and instantly fled to the side with his right foot. He knew that with his Sky Saint Realm cultivation, he was no match for Long Tian. Moreover, he didn't want to become a pighead like Gu Yun, so he could only escape. Unfortunately, Qian Liang's speed was no match for Long Tian's. Long Tian stretched out his hand and Saint Qi gushed out. It turned into a dragon and instantly caught up with Qian Liang. It entangled him and then pulled him over. Slap, 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 slap. Long Tian did not hold back as he grabbed Qian Liang by the collar. He slapped Qian Liang with his right hand at an extremely fast speed. Boom! Long Tian then threw the dying Qian Liang on the ground. His pair of cold eyes landed on the group of blood-armored soldiers in the middle of the valley. The group of blood-armored soldiers felt their hearts skip a beat. They felt as though they were being stared at by a poisonous snake. It seems like all of you have a hobby of trampling on newbies. If that's the case, why don't you trample on me as well? Jun slowly walked to Long Tian's side as his eyes landed on the group of blood-armored soldiers. However, his words caused the group of blood-armored soldiers to curse in their hearts. After witnessing Long Tian's terrifying strength, How would they dare to trample on them? Tell me, where is this place? Seeing that the group of blood-armored soldiers did not speak, Yuan could not be bothered with them. Instead, he asked indifferently, "This is the capital of the blood-refining mansion, the Blood Jade County. This valley is called the Blood Flow Valley." The Blood Flow Valley is the location of one of the few teleportation formations in the blood-refining mansion that is connected to the outside world, one of the blood-armored soldiers said with a flattering smile. After seeing what happened to Gu Yun and Qian Liang, the group of blood-armored soldiers naturally became more cautious. They did not dare to speak carelessly. They also answered Zhuowen's questions without hesitation. Blood-refining mansion? Zhuowen raised his eyebrows. At the same time, he began to search by Fang's memories for information related to the blood-refining mansion. In the Central Plains, there were a total of 99 mansions. Every mansion was extremely vast. The extent of its vastness was not inferior to the 4 main regions. Some mansions were even larger than the 4 main regions. The blood-refining mansion was one of the 99 mansions. Bai Fang's family, the Bai clan, was in the Green Lotus Mansion. However, the Green Lotus Mansion was more than 10 mansions away from the blood-refining mansion. It was an extremely long distance. Moreover, the relationship between the blood-refining mansion and the Green Lotus Mansion was not good. Hence, there was no communication between the 2 mansions. Hence, there was no teleportation formation between the 2 mansions. Hence, it was impossible to teleport from the blood-refining mansion to the Green Lotus Mansion. What's going on? A rough voice suddenly sounded from the entrance of the valley. A middle-aged brawny man in a ferocious blood-red armor walked over quickly. When his gaze fell on the dying Gu Yun and Qian Liang, who were swollen like pigs, a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. Then his gaze quickly fell on Long Tian and Zhu. "It's the captain. The captain is here." The group of soldiers in blood-red armor, who had been silent out of fear, heaved a sigh of relief when they saw the burly man in blood-red armor. It was as though the burly man in blood-red armor was their backbone. His arrival calmed them down. The burly man in blood-red armor came before Gu Yun and Qian Liang. He bent down and checked on them with his right hand. When he found that they were not in mortal danger, his gaze softened a little. "You brought Gu Yun and Qian Liang to treat their injuries. Are the 2 of you new here?" The burly man in blood-red armor said to the group of soldiers in blood-red armor. His eyes were like torches as he stared at Zhuowen and Long Tian. "If there is nothing else, we are going to leave this place," Zhuowen said nonchalantly. He took Long Tian with him and tried to pass by the burly man in blood-red armor. The burly man in blood-red armor raised his right hand and blocked Zhuowen's path. His gaze was sinister as he said, "Do you think you can leave so easily after beating up my subordinates? Your subordinates treated us as pushovers. I only taught them a small lesson. Is there a problem with that?" Zhuowen said nonchalantly. The burly man in blood-red armor narrowed his eyes. He had naturally heard about how the soldiers in blood-red armor often trampled on the newcomers. However, he did not expect to kick an iron plate this time. Moreover, the burly man in blood-red armor could sense that Long Tian, who was beside Zhuowen, was not weak. Both of them were experts at the profound glimpse Saint stage. The burly man in blood-red armor looked at Long Tian before his gaze fell on Zhuowen. He said nonchalantly, "I can let you leave, but..." At this point, the burly man in blood-red armor pointed at Zhuowen and said, "If you can take 3 of my moves, I will let you go immediately." Based on Long Tian's aura, there was no doubt that the burly man in blood-red armor was at the profound glimpse Saint stage. Although Long Tian was respectful to the burly man in front of him, the burly man in blood-red armor did not exude any powerful aura. Therefore, the burly man in blood-red armor boldly guessed that the burly man in front of him did not have a strong cultivation. He should be a young master of one of the overlord forces in the 4 major regions. The burly man in blood-red armor made this request because he did not want to let Zhuowen and Long Tian leave so easily. After all, his subordinates had been beaten up. If he did not seek justice for his subordinates, his prestige would drop significantly. Long Tian looked at the burly man in blood-red armor strangely. He did not expect the burly man in blood-red armor to provoke Zhuan. Was he not courting death? Zhuan's cultivation had already reached the profound fragmentation saint stage. Moreover, his actual combat strength was far beyond his cultivation on the surface. Regardless of whether it was cultivation or combat strength, the burly man in blood-red armor was completely defeated by Zhuan. However, the burly man in blood-red armor did not know what was good for him and challenged Zhuan. This was a perfect example of the saying, "If you don't court death, you won't die." If you can get up after taking one of my punches, you can do whatever you want with me, Zhuan said, somewhat amused. How arrogant. The burly man in blood-red armor squinted his eyes and snorted coldly. You think you can defeat me with one punch? How ridiculous. I would like to have a taste of your strength. As he spoke, the burly man in blood-red armor stomped his right foot on the ground. Following that, the ground under his feet began to crack. His aura was rising at a terrifying speed that was visible to the naked eye. Boom! The burly man in blood-red armor was like a muffled thunder. As he stomped his foot on the ground, his speed was like lightning. In an instant he disappeared from where he was standing. The ground where he had been standing collapsed into countless pieces. Blood Oxbow Horn. Chapter 1606. Xiao Yu, it's actually the Blood Oxbow Horn. I didn't expect the captain to use a killing move right from the start. Is he planning to defeat this young man in one blow? This young man is too arrogant. It's understandable that the captain would use a killing move. The moment the red-armored man used the Blood Oxbow Horn, the surrounding red-armored soldiers were in an uproar and spread out in all directions. Although Long Tian had shown great strength and was respectful to the zombie-faced young man, the zombie-faced young man's aura was weak. His strength was definitely not great. Their guess was similar to the red-armored man's. After the uproar, many of the red-armored soldiers had mocking looks on their faces. The red-armored man was their captain and his strength had reached the profound glimpse saint realm. His battle strength was not any weaker than Long Tian's. In fact, he might even be stronger. In their opinion, the zombie-faced young man who looked weak would definitely not be a match for their captain. The burly man in crimson armor was extremely fast. He was like an illusory crimson light that soared into the sky. The crimson shadow transformed into a huge crimson bowl that was like a huge crimson mountain that came crashing down from the sky with boundless power. Zhuan slowly raised his head and stared at the blood-red bowl that was getting closer and closer. It was like a straight spear that stood quietly on the spot. As the wind whistled, Zhuan's long hair fluttered in the wind. He looked very carefree. In the eyes of the red-armored soldiers, Zhuan's appearance was a complete fool. They could not help but laugh. The red-armored man's smile became wider and wider. It was like a blooming daisy that looked slightly sinister. When the blood-colored bull was within 10 meters of him, Zhuan slowly stretched out his right hand and made a grabbing motion in the air. Immediately, an ink-black dragon seal appeared in his palm. Clang! As soon as the dragon seal appeared, black chains shot out and bound the blood-red bull. Countless dragon shadows appeared on the surface of the black chain, roaring towards the sky. It was Zhuan's Heavenly Dragon Lock seal. Although he had learned the Heavenly Dragon Lock mark when he was in the Emperor realm, the power of the Heavenly Dragon Lock mark naturally increased as his strength increased. It was not difficult for the bulky man in blood-red armor, whose cultivation was lower than his. Zhuan held the Heavenly Dragon Lock seal in his right hand. Then he clenched his fist and threw the blood-red bull. The blood-red bull let out a sad cry and was thrown to the ground, raising a cloud of dust. The man in blood-red armor couldn't help but be dragged away by this terrifying force. He fell to the ground in a sorry state, as if he was a dog eating shit. The red-armored man pressed his hands against the ground, and just as he was about to get up, a foot reached out and stomped on his body. Poochie! The strength of this foot was immense. When it landed on the back of the man in blood-red armor, he spat out a mouthful of blood and buried his face in the ground. Although the burly man's blood energy was gushing out like a volcanic eruption, it was easy to see how terrifying the burly man's blood energy was just by looking at it. Even so, The man in blood-red armor couldn't get up under Zhuowen's right foot. No matter how hard he struggled, it was to no avail. Looking at this funny scene, the soldiers in blood-red armor, who were waiting to watch a good show, were all stunned. Some of the soldiers even slapped themselves in the face, thinking that they were hallucinating. The man in blood-red armor, who had used his strongest killing move, the blood bull bow horn, couldn't even withstand one move from the young man with a zombie face. He was knocked to the ground. Long Tian sneered in his heart. He knew Zhuowen's strength, so when the man in blood-red armor challenged Zhuowen, he knew that the man in blood-red armor was courting death. The result was within his expectations. I heard from your soldiers that this is your strongest killing move? How dare you call such a weak move a killer move? Zhuowen stepped on the man in blood-red armor. His shoulder-length hair fluttered in the wind, and his eyes were indifferent. He looked like a peerless expert. The man in blood-red armor trembled. Although he struggled even more violently, his struggle was futile under Zhuowen's foot. What's the difference between you, Gu Yun, and Qianliang? Before you pick on the weak, you'd better train your eyes. With that, Zhuowen moved his right foot and kicked the man in blood-red armor in the chest. The man in blood-red armor groaned and spat out a mouthful of blood. He was sent flying in a sorry state. Captain! When the group of soldiers saw the brawny man in blood-red armor flying away, they all rushed over and tried to stop him from flying away. However, when the soldiers unleashed their saint power and came into contact with the man in blood-red armor, they felt as if their arms were pressed against an unreachable mountain. Then, the soldiers howled in pain and were sent flying as well. There were even some unlucky bastards whose arms were directly broken by the enormous force due to the frightening impact. Their screams were unceasingly heard. The group of people flew for about 100 feet before they landed on the ground. When they hit the ground, the entire bloody valley shook. Long Tian's eyes flickered as he revealed a wisp of shock. He had never imagined that Zhuowen's attack would be so terrifying. There was no doubt that if he were to face Zhuowen now, he would not be able to take even one blow. He would not be any better than the man in blood-red armor. Master strength is getting more and more terrifying, Long Tian thought to himself as he stared at the unmoving figure in front of him with mixed feelings. Longden, let's go. Zhuowen did not care about the men in blood-red armor who were sent flying by his kick. He took a step forward and walked out of the bloody valley. Long Tian quickly followed behind Zhuowen. His eyes were like torches as he walked with a majestic gait. The man in blood-red armor covered his chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was as pale as snow. He struggled to stand up and stared at the two men who were leaving the bloody valley. His legs were trembling. As for the blood-armored soldiers behind him, they were all howling in agony and shrieking incessantly. Where did these two men come from? I must report this to the general. The man in blood-red armor said hatefully before he staggered out of the bloody valley. The Blood Jade County was the capital of the blood refining mansion. It was also the largest county in the entire mansion. The ruler of the blood refining mansion, Mansion Master Shui Hentian, lived in the Blood Jade County. There were a total of 99 prefectures in the Central Plains. Every prefecture was extremely vast, and the strength of the prefecture master of each prefecture was extremely terrifying. Although the blood refining mansion could only be considered average among the 99 mansions, it was still far more powerful than the combined forces of the 4 major domains. The Blood Jade County was huge. It was like a crouching ancient beast. Above the huge county, there was a river of blood jade floating. The entire county was filled with a faint smell of blood. As he walked through Bloodshed County, Zhuowen only had one feeling about this county city, and that was that it was huge, extremely huge. Moreover, the cultivators of Emerald Blood County were all like dragons and tigers, and their auras were as vigorous as dragons. Even some half-saints and invincible imperial lords had auras that were far more powerful than cultivators of the same level from the other 4 regions. Zhuowen and Long Tian strolled around the county for half a day. However, they were still unable to explore the entire county. With Zhuowen's powerful will, they had not even covered 1% of the county. One could imagine how huge the county was. It was not something any city in the 4 major domains could compare to. After strolling around for a while, Nguyen and Long Tian found an ordinary inn. They planned to stay there for the time being. After that, they would inquire about the central region and how to get to the Green Lotus Mansion. The Bai family was in the Green Lotus Mansion. Zhuan had promised the Bai Fong that if he came to the central region, he would definitely pay the Bai family a visit and return the Bai Fong's belongings. Of course, if there was something Zhuan could help with, he would naturally help. If the Bai family was strong enough, with Zhuan's meager strength, helping them would be unnecessary. However, he could faintly sense from the Bai Fong's memories that the Bai family had begun to decline back then. He just did not know if the Bai family would continue to decline or rise against the trend after so many years had passed. The inn that Zhuan and Long Tian chose was one of the most inconspicuous on the street. On the surface, the inn looked extremely ordinary, even a little shabby. It was a far cry from the grand inns they had visited before. However, it was much quieter than the other places. It suited Zhuan's taste. At his level, the comfort of his residence did not affect him much. He valued the environment more. If the environment was quiet, even if it was in the wilderness, Zhuan could stay there for a year or so. Although this inn was a bit run down, there were still quite a few martial artists living inside. Zhuo Wenming discovered that most of the martial artists who came in and out of the entrance had very weak cultivations. Most of them were actually Emperor Realm martial artists. Zhuo Wenming even saw a few Empyreans. This kind of cultivation might be considered good in the 4 great regions, but in a place like the central region, it was simply the lowest level of existence. Xiaoyu, you're up so early again. You're really diligent. Hard work pays off. Xiaoyu, you have to work hard. In the future, you'll definitely become an expert and be famous in the Blood Justice County. When the time comes, Xiaoyu will have a meteoric rise. You have to take care of us brothers. After these cultivators walked out of the inn, they would greet a rather delicate figure at the entrance of the inn with great enthusiasm and concern. Zhuan's gaze passed these cultivators and landed on the delicate figure. The figure was rather petite, half a head shorter than Zhuan. It was wearing some old loose clothes. These clothes were ordinary adult men's clothes. However, on the petite figure, it was like a loose robe. It was a great contrast. The figure had short hair and a delicate face. It was 17 or 18 years old and looked like a handsome man standing quietly. Chapter 1607. Peace In. The girl was young, but because she was wearing the clothes of a grown man, if one did not look carefully, they might think that she was a delicate and pretty little boy. Of course, the girl was not deliberately dressed as a man. She was just wearing the clothes of a grown man. The girl sat cross-legged at the entrance of the inn, breathing quietly. The power of stars was faintly discernible around her body. With Zhuowen's cultivation, he could naturally tell that the girl's cultivation had reached the peak of the 6th Heaven Emperor realm. She was not far from the 7th Heaven Emperor realm. From the cultivators who came out of the inn, it could be seen that the girl in front of them was the manager or owner of the inn. Faced with the many cultivators in the inn, the girl smiled slightly and politely answered them one by one. Her eyes were filled with determination. Brothers, are you also here to stay? The inn established by Xiaoyu and her grandfather is the most reasonable and the cheapest inn in the entire Blood Jade County. The two of you have really come to the right place. Cultivators walked out of the inn in groups of 2s and 3s, chatting and laughing. When they passed by Zhuowen and Long Tian, an older cultivator smiled kindly at the two of them and said, "Let's go." In his words, there was naturally no lack of praise for this inn. In his opinion, since Zhuowen and Long Tian had come here, they were probably similar to them. Their cultivation was not high and they did not have enough spirit stones to afford the luxurious inns in Blood Justice County. Therefore they had come to this inn. A strange look appeared in Zhuowen's eyes as he looked at the group of cultivators who had kind smiles on their faces. In the world of cultivators, Yuan had struggled for many years. He knew that the world of cultivators was cruel and the strong preyed on the weak. This was the first time he had seen such a kind smile on a cultivator's face. "You can say that," Zhuowen said ambiguously. The older cultivator did not mind Zhuo Wen's indifferent tone. He gave Zhuo Wen a brief introduction of the inn, and his tone suggested that he was recommending the two of them to check in. After that, he left. Welcome to Peace Inn. When Zhuo Wen and Long Tian arrived at the entrance of the inn, the girl opened her beautiful eyes and sized up Zhuo Wen and Long Tian before smiling. Zhuo Wen's gaze fell on the girl. He narrowed his eyes and frowned. Sir, do you have any questions? The girl also noticed Zhuo Wen's strange behavior and could not help but ask. It's fine. Prepare 2 rooms for the two of us. We're going to stay here for a while. Zhuo Wen said calmly. All right, the two of you, please follow me. The girl nodded and jumped down, leading Zhuo Wen and Long Tian into the inn. At the front desk of the inn stood an amiable white-haired old man. When he saw the girl bringing Zhuo Wen and Long Tian in, he hurriedly greeted them with a smile. Welcome to our inn. The white-haired old man said with a smile. Grandpa, since the two of them want to stay here, we should have a few empty rooms, right? The girl smiled sweetly. The white-haired old man nodded slightly, then took out a bunch of keys. He took out 2 keys with numbers and handed them to the girl. Rooms 67 and 68 are still empty. Innkeeper, how do we calculate the room rates? Zhuo Wen asked with a smile. There are 2 ways to calculate. One is by daily payment and the other is by monthly payment. Monthly payment is cheaper than daily payment. Daily payment is 5 lower-grade spiritual stones per day. Monthly payment is only 120 lower-grade spiritual stones, which is 30 lower-grade spiritual stones cheaper than daily payment. The white-haired old man said with a smile. Zhuo Wen's eyes flickered. He was a little surprised at the cheap price of this inn. He knew the prices of other inns. Most of them were dozens or even hundreds of times more expensive than this Peace Inn. 120 low-grade spirit stones a month was not a lot for a martial artist in a short period of time. However, martial artists had no sense of time when they cultivated. They might cultivate for a year, 2 years, 10 years, or even 100 years. Cultivating in an inn for such a long period of time was a huge sum of money for ordinary warriors. Most of them could not afford so many spiritual stones. Therefore, warriors who lived in inns would go out to earn spiritual stones every once in a while. The main reason why the Blood Azure County inns were so important was that they could not stay on the streets of the Blood Azure County. At night, the guards of the Blood Refining Mansion would patrol the streets. If they were found to be loitering outside in the middle of the night, they would be driven out of the Blood Azure County or imprisoned. Therefore, the number of inns in the Blood Azure County was much more than other shops. After all, most warriors did not own a residential area in the Blood Azure County. The price of a residence in the Blood Azure County was extremely expensive. It would easily cost thousands or tens of thousands of higher-grade spiritual stones. Even Zhuo Wen could not afford so many spiritual stones. Then let's do the monthly payment. After Zhuo Wen handed over 240 low-grade spirit stones, he was led upstairs by the girl. Now, Zhuo Wen was not in a hurry to leave the Blood Azure County. He planned to first understand the specific route from the Blood Refining Mansion to the Green Lotus Mansion before setting off. After all, he was not familiar with the central region. If he left in a daze, it would only cause unnecessary trouble. After entering the guest room, the girl named Xiao Yu briefly introduced the room's facilities and then left the room. Of course, Xiao Yu's introduction was superfluous for Zhuo Wen and Long Tian because the room was really simple. In the room, besides a bed, there was an old table, an old stool, and an oil lamp that had not yet burned out. My lord, the way you looked at the girl was a little different. Is there something wrong with her? Long Tian suddenly asked. It's not that there's a problem with this girl. It's just that this girl's physique is somewhat strange. She's clearly a girl, but I actually felt an extremely blazing yang energy in her body. However, this feeling disappeared in a flash. Perhaps I was mistaken. Zhuo Wen shook his head. Long Tian nodded and cupped his fists at Zhuo Wen before returning to his room. Zhuo Wen slowly sat on the edge of the bed. His eyes flickered as he muttered, I'll absorb Senior Bai Feng's memories about the Blood Refining Mansion and the Green Lotus Mansion. It'll be more convenient when the time comes. After saying that, Jun slowly closed his eyes and his consciousness sank into his sea of consciousness. At the same time, Jun also handed the materials for the golden lightning body tempering slurry to Cheng Huang. After all, Cheng Huang was skilled in alchemy and knew much more than Jun. In an extremely large and luxurious pavilion in the Blood Jade County, a man with blood-red hair and blood-red eyes was sitting on a huge table. He wore a majestic exotic beast blood armor. The blood-red hair and blood-red eyes man's aura was extremely powerful. Waves of dense blood chi soared and erupted from the man's body. The blood chi soared and transformed into ferocious beasts, filling the entire hall with a savage and ferocious aura. A brawny man in blood-red armor knelt on the ground with one knee. He lowered his head and did not dare to raise it. In this hall, the terrifying blood-red savage chi that was everywhere shocked the brawny man in blood-red armor. This brawny man in blood-red armor was none other than the captain who was in charge of the Blood Flow Valley's teleportation array. You said that your group of people in the Blood Flow Valley were all defeated by a single person? You were even trampled under his feet? The man with blood-red hair and blood-red eyes sat in front of the table and said indifferently. The brawny man in blood-red armor's eyes flickered and his body trembled. He squeezed out a smile with difficulty and said, "Sir, that person's strength is too strong. He's definitely far beyond the glimpse profound saint realm. This person might be a pure profound saint realm or even a fragmented profound saint realm saint. There's such a powerful saint from the 4 major regions?" The man with blood-red hair and blood-red eyes frowned slightly and said in surprise, "Sir, it's true. Otherwise, our group wouldn't have been beaten so badly by this person. Sir, this person is so arrogant and doesn't put our blood-refining mansion in his eyes at all. Don't you think we should punish him?" The brawny man in blood-red armor raised his head with difficulty and said with a forced smile, "What's the origin of this person?" The man with blood-red hair and blood-red eyes asked calmly. The brawny man in blood-red armor's eyes flickered and smiled awkwardly. This person didn't say, and we don't have the ability to do so. You don't even know his origin. You're just a bunch of trash." The man with blood-red hair and blood-red eyes slowly stood up. Suddenly, the blood chi in the hall surged like a roaring dragon. "Pucci!" The brawny man in blood-red armor's face turned pale. Under the pressure of the blood chi, he fell to the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood. He was terrified to the extreme. He knew very well how cruel and terrifying the sir in front of him was. Although he hadn't been in office for a long time, his strength made many of the other generals in the Blood Jade County fearful and fearful. The new general in front of him was said to be a genius who was qualified to challenge for the position of the #1 general in Blood Jade County. In addition, he was an extremely tyrannical existence. If he was in a bad mood, he could even kill his subordinates. Get lost and find out where that person is. If you can't even do this, you can bring your own head to me. The man with blood-red hair and blood-red eyes waved his right hand and the blood chi in the surroundings suddenly disappeared and was absorbed into his palm. Yes, thank you, sir." The brawny man in blood-red armor repeatedly kowtowed and then left the hall in fear. He's also from the 4 great regions. If it's that guy, he might have become a saint by now. I just don't know what level his cultivation has reached. The man with blood-red hair and blood-red eyes slowly walked out of the hall. A gust of wind blew his blood-red hair and revealed his handsome face. He raised his head slightly and looked at the blazing sun in the sky. There was a complicated and nostalgic look in his eyes. At night, Zhuan slowly opened his eyes. There was a bright light in his eyes, but he smiled bitterly and said, "It turns out that the relationship between the Blood Refining Mansion and the Green Lotus Mansion was very bad at that time. The 2 manors did not contact each other for thousands of years, so there was no transportation formation between the 2 manors." Chapter 1608. Asking for trouble in the Baifeng's memories. Although there were several teleportation arrays in the Blood Refining Mansion, none of them led to the Green Lotus Mansion or even the nearby Green Lotus Mansion. As for whether there were other methods, the Baifeng's memories didn't mention them. After all, the central region was so big, and the Baifeng couldn't have been to every mansion. Coincidentally, The blood refining mansion was a mansion that the Bai Feng wasn't familiar with. With a light sigh, Zhuowen sat up. He knew that if he wanted to find a suitable route, he would have to go out and ask someone. After calling out to Long Tian, the two of them walked out of the inn. When they reached the entrance, the girl named Xiao Yu was still meditating cross-legged. Zhuowen nodded slightly. This Xiao Yu's requirements for herself were extremely harsh. Whenever she had time, she would spend it on cultivation. Although Zhuowen didn't know why Xiao Yu was so hardworking in her cultivation, Zhuowen appreciated this kind of cultivator who could make up for her lack of talent through hard work. Talent wasn't something that all cultivators possessed. This kind of thing was destined by the heavens and couldn't be changed. Therefore, some people were born geniuses. Just by casually cultivating, they could increase their cultivation to the point where it would take an ordinary cultivator a long time to cultivate. The heavens were unfair, but one's fate was in their own hands. If one's talent wasn't good enough and didn't know how to work hard, then this kind of person would never be able to reach the top. They wouldn't even have the qualifications to climb the peak. As for someone like Xiao Yu, her talent might not be comparable to those monstrous geniuses, but if she worked hard in her cultivation, there would be a day when she would have a harvest of her own. The two of you only stayed here for a day and already went out? Xiao Yu slowly opened her beautiful eyes and looked at Zhuowen and Long Tian in surprise. Yes, there are some things that we need to do, Zhuowen said with a smile. Xiao Yu frowned and shook her head. You two are wasting spirit stones like this. Both of you have already paid the monthly payment, so you can cultivate for a month before going out. This way, you won't waste spirit stones and won't delay your cultivation. This is the best of both worlds. Hearing Xiao Yu's reproachful words, Long Tian's gaze was a little strange. If Xiao Yu was aware of their cultivation, she would not have said such words. When Long Tian wanted to remind her, Yuan raised his hand to stop Long Tian. He smiled at Xiao Yu and said, Miss Xiao Yu is right. However, this matter is very important to the two of us, so we have to go out and do it. Xiao Yu frowned and sighed. Since that is the case, you can leave. Remember to come back early. Cultivation is not easy. Time is extremely precious to us cultivators. Zhuowen smiled. With his cultivation, he could completely ignore Xiao Yu's reminder. However, this was the latter's good intention. Zhuowen naturally wouldn't expose her, nor would he show off his cultivation. After Zhuowen and Long Tian left, Xiao Yu shook her head slightly and muttered to herself, the aura of the two of them isn't strong. They are around the low-level Emperor realm. In this Blood Justice County, they can be considered as the lowest level of existence. They actually didn't work hard to cultivate, sigh. Because Zhuowen and Long Tian had concealed most of their aura, Xiao Yu could sense that their auras were equivalent to low-level Emperor realm cultivators. After leaving the Peace Inn, Zhuowen strolled on the streets while Long Tian respectfully followed behind him. Zhuowen and Long Tian strolled around the Blood Justice County for half a day. This time, their speed was obviously much faster than before. After asking around for a long time, Zhuowen and Long Tian didn't manage to obtain any valuable information. In the Blood Justice County, most of the cultivators were at the bottom. Many of them had never even left the Blood Refining Mansion. It was like a blind man trying to find the way to the Green Lotus Mansion from these people. My lord, ordinary cultivators probably don't know how to get to the Green Lotus Mansion. If we continue like this, we will just be wasting our time. Long Tian said helplessly. It is said that the mansion master of the Blood Refining Mansion is called Shui Hentian. As the mansion master, I'm afraid he definitely knows the specific way to the Green Lotus Mansion. Zhuowen said as he raised his head. His sharp eyes focused on the center of the Blood Justice County, where a huge blood-red building was located. The blood-red building was shaped like an ancient giant beast. There were many blood-red horns protruding from its surface. It looked quite ferocious. The blood-red building was the mansion of the mansion master of the Blood Refining Mansion, Shui Hentian. In the Blood Justice County, it was a huge building that everyone looked up to. My lord, are you planning to barge into Shui Hentian's mansion? Long Tian asked in a deep voice with a solemn expression. Although Long Tian didn't know much about the central region, he knew that the mansion masters of the 99 mansions in the central region were all terrifyingly powerful. The strength of Xue Hentian, the mansion master of the blood refining mansion, was considered average among the 99 mansion masters. It was said that his cultivation had reached the heaven-defying saint realm. Moreover, Xue Hentian had emerged from countless battles. His strength was much stronger than an ordinary heaven-defying saint realm expert. He wasn't someone that an ordinary heaven-defying saint realm expert could compare with. Although Zhuan was strong, Long Tian still didn't think that Zhuan would be a match for Xue Hentian. Of course not. How could anyone who can become the lord of a manor be mediocre and simple? Zhuo Wen said indifferently. Then my lord. Long Tian said with some doubts. If you become a general of the blood refining mansion and become a senior in the blood refining mansion, you'll be able to enter Xue Hentian's mansion. At that time, you should be able to find out some secrets about the Green Lotus mansion, Zhuan said. Long Tian's eyes lit up. Just as he was about to speak, there was a sudden uproar. Then, dense and orderly footsteps came from the corner ahead. The footsteps were like metal stepping on the ground. It was crisp and pleasing to the ear. There was even a hint of metal in the sound. The cultivators on both sides of the street made way. Soon after, a group of aggressive blood-armored soldiers appeared from the corner. The leader of the group was a brawny man in blood-armored armor. It's this guy again. Long Tian's eyes focused on the brawny man in blood armor. His expression immediately became somewhat gloomy. He naturally recognized this brawny man in blood armor. He was the captain when they first arrived at the Blood Flow Valley yesterday. I finally found you. The brawny man in blood armor's eyes flashed. He laughed heartily as he led the group of blood-armored soldiers in front of Zhuan and Long Tian. What's going on? Aren't these the elite soldiers of the Blood General Pavilion? Why have they been brought out? These two are going to be unlucky. I wonder what they've offended the Blood General Pavilion. To think that the Blood General Pavilion would dispatch their elite troops to surround them. The warriors who had originally avoided the two sides of the street began to discuss spiritedly when they saw this scene. Their eyes flickered as they wantonly commented. The Blood General of the Blood General Pavilion was extremely famous in the Blood Jade County. Moreover, this Blood General had defeated the other generals not long after he became a general. His momentum was comparable to the number 1 general, and he could be considered an influential figure in the Blood Jade County. The elite troops of the Blood General Pavilion were also extremely easy to identify. Those who wore blood-colored armor were the soldiers of the Blood General Pavilion. Zhuowen's gaze was indifferent as he stared at the brawny man in blood armor and said indifferently, "A good dog doesn't block the way. Don't you know that? Or did I go too easy on you last time and you want to be crippled before you're satisfied?" The brawny man in blood armor's gaze turned cold as he involuntarily took a step back, a look of lingering fear on his face. The scene of him being sent flying by a single punch from the youth in front of him in the Blood Flow Valley was still vivid in his mind. He clearly understood that the youth before him could kill him if he wanted to. However, if he didn't complete the mission given to him by the Blood General, he would probably die. Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, he said in a deep voice, "Our Blood General Pavilion's master, Lord Blood General, wishes to see you. Is there a need to mobilize so many people just to see me?" Zhuowen said indifferently. These are the elite troops of the Blood General Pavilion. Their combined strength is terrifying. Don't think that you're invincible just because you defeated me before. Let me tell you now, you're just a frog at the bottom of a well. The brawny man in blood armor glanced at the elite troops behind him. He seemed to have gained a lot of courage as he spoke in a shaky voice. "Is that so?" Zhuowen smiled and took a step forward. A gust of wind rose from his feet and soared into the sky. Rumble. With one step, dense cracks began to appear on the ground under his feet. These cracks crisscrossed and covered the ground. The brawny man in blood armor narrowed his eyes as he stared at the youth who had taken a step forward. At this moment, the youth's aura had reached an unprecedented level of terror. He felt as if he was not facing a person at this moment, but a lofty mountain that he could only look up to. Crack, crack, crack. Zhuowen suddenly took a second step. His aura was even stronger than before. The cracks on the ground were even more terrifying, almost spreading across the entire street. Thump, thump, thump. Zhuan took 8 steps forward in a row. His aura rose with each step. When he took the last step, he was already 3 meters away from the brawny man in blood armor. The moment Zhuowen's aura reached its peak, the entire street began to shake violently. Then, the ground completely cracked. The buildings on both sides collapsed into countless pieces. On the street, many cultivators fled like birds startled by the twang of a bow, leaving the street far away. The brawny man in blood armor's legs trembled. He actually knelt on the ground with a plop. Under this terrifying aura, the soldiers behind him could not even straighten their backs. It was as if an extremely heavy mountain was pressing down on them. What is your cultivation level? How can you have such a terrifying aura? The brawny man in blood armor cried out in shock. At the same time, he secretly regretted that he had been in such a hurry to find this devil in front of him. He should have waited for the blood general to come before attacking. Chapter 1609. Blood Demon, kneel. Zhuowen's voice was like the might of the heavens as his aura suddenly changed. Like a mountain, it ruthlessly pressed down on the brawny man and the blood-armored soldiers behind him. Plop, plop. The brawny man spat out a mouthful of blood. His legs trembled as he directly knelt on the ground. Naturally, the blood-armored soldiers behind him were not spared as they all knelt on the ground. Hiss, hiss, hiss. This scene caused many of the surrounding cultivators to involuntarily suck in a breath of cold air. The elite troops of the Blood General Pavilion were actually unable to withstand this person's aura and had knelt down. Exactly how terrifying was this person? Long Tian stared at Zhuowen's back. The shock in his heart was no less than the onlookers. Zhuowen's strength had somewhat exceeded his expectations. You said that the Blood General of the Blood General Pavilion wants to see me? Are you planning to capture me? Zhuowen looked down at the brawny man in blood-armored armor and asked nonchalantly. The brawny man in blood-armored armor lowered his head and maintained his silence. However, he was secretly complaining in his heart. This person was just too powerful. He was probably close to the Blood General of the Blood General Pavilion. Swoosh! A terrifying bloody aura suddenly appeared in the sky above the ruined street. This bloody aura transformed into a huge dragon and swooped down toward Zhuowen. Zhuowen suddenly threw out a punch. Saint energy poured out like a waterfall, causing the surrounding air to flow in reverse and space to shatter. When this punch landed on the dragon, a ring-shaped shockwave erupted, causing the entire street to tremble violently. Zhuowen retreated several feet. With a wave of his sleeve, he dissipated the impact of the collision. He stood up straight as the wind whistled. His long hair and sleeves fluttered in the wind. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He lifted his head and saw a man with blood-red hair and eyes in the sky. He was stepping on endless bloody aura as he walked over. The dragon from before was formed by the bloody aura around this man. Its power was extremely terrifying. General, the moment Zhuowen retreated, the terrifying aura on his body completely collapsed. The burly man in blood-red armor and the others naturally regained their freedom. They stood up and stared excitedly at the blood-haired man who was walking through the air. The man with blood-red hair and eyes landed in front of the crimson-armored man and the others. He nodded gently before his gaze landed on Zhuowen and Long Tian. He said indifferently, "The two of you are from the 4 major regions?" Zhuowen stared at the man with red hair and red eyes in a strange manner. He did not answer the man's question directly. Instead, he sighed inwardly, "I didn't expect to meet him in the blood-refining residence. It seems like he returned to the Central Plains." Zhuowen's silence caused the blood-haired, blood-eyed man to be somewhat displeased. He frowned slightly, and just as he was about to attack, his pupils suddenly shrank. He carefully sized up Zhuowen from head to toe, his brows furrowed as he revealed a pondering expression. "The two of us are indeed from the 4 major regions. If there's nothing else, we'll be leaving first," Zhuowen said indifferently. He planned to leave with Long Tian. "Wait!" The crimson-haired man suddenly called out to Zhuowen, and Zhuowen turned to the crimson-haired man and said, "May I know what advice you have for me, General?" A wisp of a smile appeared on the corners of the man's mouth, Brother, why don't you make a trip to my Blood General Pavilion? There are some things that I would like to ask you. Of course, it's to convince you of my sincerity. With that, the man grinned. He reached out with his right hand and grabbed the crimson-armored man behind him. General, wait, what are you doing? The crimson-armored man did not expect the man to make a move. He could not help screaming and struggling. The crimson-haired man smiled cruelly as he exerted force with his right hand. Instantly, the crimson-armored man let out a shrill cry as he exploded into a bloody mist under the enormous force of the crimson-haired man. The blood mist was sucked into the crimson-haired man's body like a magnet. The crimson-haired man revealed a look of enjoyment. This scene shocked many of the surrounding warriors. Their bodies trembled, and some of them even hid far away in fear. The Blood General was well known in the Blood Azure County. He was ruthless to both his own people and his enemies. The elite troops behind the Blood General's pavilion all looked calm, as if they were used to the Blood General's ruthless behavior. Take this as an apology to you, brother. Now that I'm sincere enough, I wonder if you can be as sincere as me? The Blood General grinned. Zhuan smiled and said, since the Blood General is so enthusiastic, I won't spoil the fun. Brother, you're really straightforward. Come with me. The Blood General laughed and waved his right hand. The crimson-armored soldiers behind him retreated, and the Blood General made an inviting gesture to Zhuan. Zhuan smiled and followed quietly with Long Tian. That's terrifying. Who are these two people? How could they make the Blood General treat them so politely? The Blood General should be so courteous because of the young man's strength. Just now, the young man's aura alone caused the entire street to collapse. He must be at least a profound sage or above to be able to do that. When Zhuan left with the Blood General, the warriors who were hiding far away all rushed back to the street that had already turned into ruins, sighing endlessly. A girl in adult clothes ran all the way and landed at the edge of the ruined street. She was immediately dumbfounded. Just now, she had been attracted by the terrible sound of destruction and hurried over from the door of the inn out of curiosity. The whole street collapsed in an instant. What kind of destructive power could do that? After all, the buildings in the Blood Azure County were not built with ordinary bricks and tiles. These buildings were extremely tough. Even the girl, who was at the peak of the mid-level martial emperor realm, could not destroy one of the bricks and tiles even if she used all her strength. The strength of the zombie-faced young man is so terrifying. Just his momentum alone destroyed the whole street. If I had such strength, I'm afraid I would also be treated politely by the famous Blood General. The girl heard the discussion around her. She was shocked and thought of the two people who had walked out. Didn't one of them have a zombie-faced face? Could it be him? The girl was a little absent-minded. She immediately shook her head and said, impossible. If that person is really so strong, how could he take a fancy to the peace inn? Thought too much. Thinking of this, the girl laughed at herself and left the street. But when she left, she looked at the ruined street from time to time, her beautiful eyes full of envy and desire. How great would it be if she could possess such power? That way, she might be able to avenge her parents. In the Blood General Pavilion, in a rather secluded pavilion, the Blood General looked into the distance with his hands behind his back, not saying a word. Zhuan stood quietly behind him with Long Tian, looking at the Blood General in front of him calmly. After a long time, the Blood General slowly turned around. He looked at Zhuan and said with a grin, Brother Zhua, I haven't seen you for many years. Your cultivation has advanced to such a level. It really surprises me. Zhuan narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, How did you recognize me? The Blood General laughed and said, It seems that you are indeed Brother Zhua. As for how I recognized you, it's mainly because of your aura. Although your aura is very hidden, I can still recognize it. After all, we have been together day and night. Apart from your dragon soul, I am the most familiar with your aura. Long Tian looked at the Blood General and Zhuan in surprise. He didn't expect them to be old acquaintances. From their conversation, he could tell that they had known each other for a long time. Zhuan pondered for a moment and said indifferently, I see. No wonder you could recognize me. However, I didn't expect you to come to the central region and become a general of the blood refining mansion after leaving the demon's sealing green coffin. Am I right, blood demon? I was originally a creature of the central region and was once a member of the blood refining mansion. After you let me go, I followed the route back then and found the teleportation point of the blood refining mansion. Finally, I came to the blood refining mansion. If I didn't have the contact information of a few old guys, I'm afraid my cultivation wouldn't have recovered so quickly. The blood demon grinned. Zhuan looked serious. At this moment, the blood demon's aura was many times stronger than before. His aura had reached the level of the Sun Sky Saint realm. Moreover, the blood demon was an ancient saint-level creature. His battle strength was naturally much stronger than warriors of the same level. If Zhuan were to deal with the blood demon, he would need to use his body, which cultivated the physique, to suppress the blood demon in front of him. You should have recognized me after seeing me, right? You must have invited me to your blood general pavilion for a reason, right? Speak, Zhuan said indifferently. The blood demon chuckled and said, I like to cooperate with smart people. Speaking of this, the blood demon's eyes turned serious and he continued, I don't know if you know the hierarchy of the blood refining mansion. The blood refining mansion is divided into 4 levels. The first level is the mansion master of the blood refining mansion, Shui Hentian. He is the strongest person in the blood refining mansion. His cultivation has reached the peak of the heaven-defying saint realm. More importantly, he has an immortal saint weapon. Therefore, although he has not reached the immortal saint realm, he can occupy the position of the mansion master. Yuan was shocked and said, Shui Hentian has an immortal saint weapon. The blood demon cast a sidelong glance at Zhuan and said indifferently, immortal saint weapons are also divided into 3 levels. They are earthly immortal saint weapons, heavenly immortal saint weapons, and true immortal saint weapons. Chapter 1610. Blood Refining Divine Pond, Earthly Immortal Saint Weapon? Zhuan was shocked. No wonder Shui Hentian could become the mansion master of Blood Refining Mansion when he was only at the heaven-defying saint stage. He had an earthly immortal saint weapon. A celestial saint weapon was much more terrifying than an ascended saint weapon. Although Shui Hentian was not a celestial saint and could not unleash the full power of an earthly immortal saint weapon, it was still much more terrifying than an ascended saint weapon. The second level is the Commander-in-Chief. He holds the Commander-in-Chief's seal and controls dozens of counties and millions of troops. The third level is the General, which is my current position. A general can only control a county and hundreds of thousands of troops. He has to listen to the Commander-in-Chief's orders. I'm the general in the third level. The fourth level is the Commander-in-Chief. The Commander-in-Chief is the general's deputy. He can control tens of thousands of troops under the general's command, but he has to obey the general's orders. When he spoke up to hear, the blood devil stared at Zhuan with blazing eyes and said, Brother Zhua, I can sense that even though your cultivation is only at the shattering saint realm, your strength is definitely above your cultivation. If I'm not wrong, your strength is comparable to the heavenly Yin saint realm, right? Zhuan smiled. He did not admit or deny it. Shuemo did not care about Zhuan's attitude and continued, the previous battle to conquer the nearby prefectures was extremely tragic. It resulted in the death of 2 lower-ranked commander-in-chief. This time, Mansion Master Shui Hentian has issued an edict to summon all the generals and commander-in-chief of Blood Refining Mansion to Blood Jade County. He plans to choose 2 new commander-in-chief to fill the 2 vacant commander-in-chief's positions. At this point, Bloodseeker stared at Zhuan with a burning gaze. Zhuan narrowed his eyes. Since Shuemo had said so much, how could he not know what Shuemo was planning? Perhaps, Shuemo wanted Zhuan to help him fight for the commander-in-chief's position. Zhuan looked at Shuemo quietly and did not say a word. The blood demon smiled and said, Brother Zhua, don't worry. If you help me this time, I won't mistreat you. You probably don't know this, but the people from the Icefire family are also looking for you. It seems like the one who gave the order is the Icefire family's young master, Jiang Binhan. Hearing this, Zhuan's gaze turned frosty. that Ice Fire family's young lord was indeed searching for his whereabouts. Luckily, he had already used the 100 transformations technique to change his appearance before entering the 9 Nether Grand Array. Otherwise, he would have been targeted by the Ice Fire family the moment he entered the blood refining mansion. "Are you going to use this to threaten me?" Zhuan said in a deep voice as he stared at the blood demon with killing intent in his eyes. Looking at the killing intent in Zhuowen's eyes, Bloodseeker's body trembled. He didn't know why, but when he saw Zhuowen's eyes that were filled with killing intent, he felt his heart tremble. Although Zhuan has a lot of trump cards, his cultivation level is too low. I was actually scared by his gaze. The blood demon shook his head and thought to himself. After regaining his senses, the blood demon shook his head and said, "Brother Zhua, you're wrong. We've been through life and death together. How can I betray you because of this? After all, I really do need your help. Do you think I'll harm my helper? Moreover, if I obtain the position of commander, I'll be able to enter the blood refining deity pond once. I can even bring my helper along." "Blood refining deity pond?" Zhuan asked doubtfully. The blood demon explained patiently, "The blood refining deity pond is a place where Xue Hentian bathes. However, don't underestimate the blood refining deity pond. The blood refining deity pond is filled with surging blood energy. This blood energy can be absorbed and transformed into saint energy. I see that your cultivation level has reached the shattering profound saint realm. If you can enter the blood refining deity pond, you can at least reach the peak of the shattering profound saint realm. If you have an epiphany, I'm afraid you can naturally advance to the heavenly saint realm." Zhuan was shocked and asked, "Does the blood refining deity pond really have such a powerful effect?" "Of course. In the blood refining mansion, there are a total of 8 commanders. The weakest of the 8 commanders is at the peak of the Yang Sky Saint Realm, and the strongest has reached the heaven-defying Saint Realm. They're almost on par with Xue Hentian. These 8 commanders had soaked in the blood refining deity pond before, so their cultivation level was extremely fast. In the end, they reached their current level. Do you think the blood refining deity pond's effect is great?" The blood demon's eyes were blazing. It was obvious that he also yearned for the blood refining deity pond. Looking at the blood demon's expression, Zhuan knew that the blood demon was not lying. This made him a little tempted, but he could not completely trust the blood demon. After all, the blood demon was not a kind person. Therefore, Zhuan was still secretly on guard. "Of course, if you choose to stay in the blood refining mansion, I can ask the mansion master to grant you the position of a general and control the military power of a county. What do you think?" the blood demon asked. Zhuan shook his head and said, "There's no need for that. My purpose in coming to the central region is not the blood refining mansion, but the Green Lotus mansion. Moreover, I have other matters to attend to. It's impossible for me to stay in the blood refining mansion. Since you're from the central region, you should know how to get to the Green Lotus mansion from the blood refining mansion, right?" As he spoke, Zhuan looked at the blood demon. The blood demon nodded and said in a deep voice, "I do know about this. However, the relationship between the blood refining mansion and the Green Lotus mansion is not good. There is no teleportation array between the 2 mansions. Therefore, if you want to go to the Green Lotus mansion, you will have to cross the mansions." The blood demon waved his sleeve and handed the jade slip to Zhuan. He said, "This jade slip records the route from the blood refining mansion to the Green Lotus mansion. You just need to follow the route. However, the distance between the 2 mansions is not small. It's much farther than the 4 mansions. If you rely on yourself, I'm afraid it will take you a long time. I suggest that you ride the Chaos Beast to the Green Lotus mansion. However, it will be extremely expensive for you." After checking the jade slip, Zhuan put it away and asked in astonishment, "Chaos Beast? What's that?" The Chaos Beast is a kind of strange beast bred by the Chaos Temple. This strange beast is born with the law of space. However, it is docile and does not take the initiative to attack. It is extremely fast. The Chaos Temple specializes in breeding these Chaos Beasts. They are used as mounts to cross the mansions. There are stations for these Chaos Beasts in every mansions. As long as you buy a ticket, you will be able to enter the Chaos Beast and travel to other mansions. If I'm not wrong, with the speed of the Chaos Beast, it will only take 2 months to travel from the Blood Refining Mansion to the Green Lotus Mansion. The price of the ticket is also very expensive. I'm afraid you will have to pay the price of a sacred artifact of Een Sky. The Blood Demon explained to Zhuan in detail about the Chaos Beast. This gave Zhuan a better understanding of the Chaos Beast. However, the price of the ticket really shocked Zhuan. The price of a ticket was actually comparable to a saint artifact of the sky of Een Tian. Wasn't this a little too exaggerated? The Blood Demon had already expected Zhuan to be surprised. He said indifferently, "Brother Zhua, you don't have to be so surprised. You should have seen the route in the Jade Slip. Although your speed is fast, it will take you at least 10 years to travel such a long distance even if you use the law of space with all your strength. This is under the condition that you are working day and night. If you have to rest during this period, I'm afraid that even 10 years won't be enough." Hearing this, Zhuan was silent for a moment. In the end, he nodded and said, "I know. Since Brother Blood Demon can tell me this, I am very grateful." "Brother Zhua, you are being too serious. Given our relationship, as long as Brother Zhua can help me win the position of commander, I will pay the fare to the Green Lotus Mansion for you. I will also let Brother Zhua enter the Blood Refinement Divine Pond," the Blood Demon said in a forthright manner. Zhuan smiled slightly, but his heart was cold. He knew that the Blood Demon would not be so kind. How could he pay the fare for him? However, the Blood Refinement Divine Pond was indeed very tempting to Zhuan. Brother Blood Demon's kindness is difficult to decline. I naturally have no reason to refuse. Also, I hope that Brother Blood Demon will remember your promise, Zhuan said meaningfully. The Blood Demon laughed heartily and said, "Of course. By the way, the commander battle will begin in 7 days. At that time, the other generals will also bring their helpers. I hope that Brother Zhua can make a trip to my Blood General Pavilion. At that time, we will enter the Blood Refinement Mansion together." Zhuan nodded. The Blood Refinement Mansion was the core area of the Blood Refinement Mansion. It was also a huge mansion where Shui Hentian was located. "Then I will take my leave first. We will meet again in 7 days. After speaking, Zhuan turned and left the hall. The Blood Demon's eyes slowly narrowed. After Zhuan left, the Blood Demon sneered and said, "Owen, I really did not expect that I, Blood Demon, would be so lucky to meet you in the Blood Refinement Mansion. If it were not for the fact that you are still of great use, I am afraid that I would have already reported this to the Icefire family. However, now is not the time. You still have to be my scapegoat in the commander battle. You have many uses, so you cannot die yet." After speaking, the Blood Demon entered the depths of the pavilion. The originally quiet pavilion was suddenly filled with a strange smell of blood. Zhuan, the Blood Demon is not a good person. Cooperating with him is no different from asking a tiger for its skin. On the street, Xiao Hei's voice slowly resounded in Zhuowen's mind. "I naturally know about this. However, the Blood Refinement Divine Pond that the Blood Demon mentioned is very attractive to me. That thing can at least raise my cultivation to the peak of the fragmented profound Saint Realm. I must enter the Blood Refinement Divine Pond at least once. Of course, if the Blood Demon really has bad intentions, I don't mind killing him." Zhuowen's eyes lit up. He was very clear that if he cultivated like this, it would take him nearly 1,000 years to reach the peak of the fragmented profound Saint Realm. Although there were still some immortal pills in the Azure Dragon Hall, only the supreme-grade immortal pills were useful to him now. However, supreme-grade immortal pills were rare in the Azure Dragon Hall. Moreover, Zhuan had consumed a lot of supreme-grade immortal pills. He had a certain resistance to the medicinal properties of supreme-grade immortal pills. Therefore, the effects of the supreme-grade immortal pills were getting worse and worse for him. Chapter 1611. A dream of eternity. After returning to the inn, Xiao Yu, who was seated cross-legged at the entrance, suddenly stopped Zhuowen and Long Tian. "Do you know about the destruction of the nearby streets?" Xiao Yu's tone was slightly excited. and at the same time, she asked with a slightly perturbed tone. Juan was stunned, and then he asked with a puzzled expression, "The destruction of the streets? I don't know about that, but when I was strolling around with Long Tian, I really did hear a rather loud noise. Could it be that there was a huge battle nearby?" Xiao Yu's beautiful eyes dimmed, and then she waved her hand and said, "Since you don't know about it, then forget it." It said that the destruction of the streets was caused by an extremely powerful young man. Merely the aura that the young man emanated was able to suppress the elites of the Blood General Pavilion to the point they knelt on the ground. It would be great if I possessed that person's strength, then I would be able to replace my father. Xiao Yu became extremely excited when she spoke about that young man, but she suddenly stopped here as if there was something that was difficult to mention. Juan was naturally sharp enough to notice Xiao Yu's slip of the tongue, but he didn't take it to heart. He smiled and said, "You're so hardworking and your talent isn't bad. One day, you'll be able to be like that person." But it's impossible for me to be like that person. That person is too strong, so strong that even I feel that I'm unable to reach him. Xiao Yu spoke in a slightly dejected manner. Juan suddenly patted Xiao Yu on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Where there's a will, there's a way. There's nothing in this world that's impossible. The reason you can't do it is because you don't have the confidence, and you haven't taken the first step to truly take action. If you want to succeed, then you have to be down to earth and take it step by step. Don't bite off more than you can chew, because that will only lead to failure in the end." After he finished speaking, Juan led Long Tian into the inn, and only Xiao Yu was left staring blankly at Juan's back as a trace of an indescribable feeling arose in her heart. After returning to his room, Juan sat cross-legged in the room. In order to prevent others from disturbing him, Juan set up layers of restrictions in the room. 3 days later, Juan, who had been sitting cross-legged, suddenly opened his eyes. A yellow light burst out from between his eyebrows, and then the old fox Cheng Huang proudly appeared in front of Juan with a porcelain bottle in hand. "Juan, I've already refined the golden lightning body tempering slurry. Take it." As Cheng Huang spoke, it tossed its little paw and the porcelain bottle floated above Juan's palm. Juan slowly opened the cork. Suddenly, a bolt of golden lightning shot into the sky. The golden lightning was accompanied by the golden liquid, which transformed into a lightning dragon in midair. As soon as the lightning dragon appeared, it roared and charged towards Juan. Waves of dragon roars resounded in his ears. "Bastard!" Juan's gaze was cold. His right hand formed into a claw and suddenly clenched. The lightning dragon that was formed by the golden lightning body tempering slurry was directly grabbed by his hand. No matter how much the lightning dragon roared, it was unable to break free from Juan's claw. Juan squeezed his right hand, and the lightning dragon collapsed. It turned back into the golden liquid and flowed into the porcelain bottle. Then, Juan waved his sleeve, and a clone appeared in front of him. This clone was naturally the clone formed by the Great Success Saint Body. Its appearance was almost exactly the same as Juan's. The only difference was that there was a faint golden light flickering on its body. It looked much more dazzling than Juan's original body. Use this golden lightning body tempering slurry to refine your physique. Perhaps you can raise your Great Success Saint Body to a higher level. Juan threw the porcelain bottle to the clone, and the clone meticulously received it. Then, it followed Juan's instructions and sat cross-legged in the corner of the room. It planned to use the golden lightning body tempering slurry in the porcelain bottle. The original body and the clone cultivated at the same time, and 4 days quietly passed. On the night of the 7th day, dark clouds covered the sky. The dark clouds lingered in the sky like a huge black dragon. On the roof of the Peace Inn, a dark shadow flickered. The dark shadow's body was as light as smoke. As it flickered, it did not even cause the slightest sound of wind. It was as if it was a real shadow. Suddenly, the dark shadow stopped on the eaves on the left side. He bent his body and reached down with his right hand. Then he gently lifted a tile. The dark shadow took out a jade-colored tube from his bosom. A wisp of invisible gas gushed out from the tube's opening. The gas spread out at an extremely fast speed. It was like a snake that instantly filled every room in the Peace Inn. In an instant, in the guest rooms of the Peace Inn, almost all the cultivators felt dizzy. Then they fell unconscious. In a brightly lit room, Xiao Yu sat cross-legged on the bed. She slowly breathed and cultivated. She did not waste any time that could be used to cultivate. My head. Why do I feel dizzy all of a sudden? Xiao Yu slowly opened her eyes. She raised her right hand and pressed it against her forehead as she muttered softly. However, she quickly realized something and quickly held her breath. Her beautiful eyes scanned the surroundings with vigilance. Her cultivation had reached the 6th-level Emperor realm. She was very clear that if she did not want to sleep, she could completely suppress the drowsiness. But now, the drowsiness was like a maggot that lingered in her mind. It was impossible to get rid of it. It seemed that she could completely fall asleep at any time under the drowsiness. With her keen intuition, she immediately realized that something was wrong. Therefore, she immediately held her breath. Your vigilance is not bad. You actually managed to smell the difference in my dream of eternity incense. A sinister voice suddenly rang out in Xiao Yu's room. Xiao Yu was startled. She gloomily discovered that a slender figure was slowly walking towards her. This person was dressed in black and his face was covered with a black cloth. Only a pair of sinister eyes could be seen. He coldly stared at Xiao Yu, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed. Step by step, he walked towards her. His gaze was like a cat that was playing with a mouse. He was very clear that although Xiao Yu had noticed that something was wrong and held her breath, she had still inhaled a small portion of the dream of eternity incense. At this moment, she was probably powerless and unable to resist. Who are you? Why did you put the sleeping incense in our Peace Inn? Xiao Yu forcefully calmed herself down and asked. The black-clothed man laughed coldly and didn't answer Xiao Yu's question. He slowly walked in front of Xiao Yu and with a flick of his right hand, he tore Xiao Yu's outer clothes into pieces, revealing her pink undergarment and her snow-white shoulders. Such a beautiful scene was enough to make many men's blood boil. Ah! Xiao Yu screamed. Her beautiful eyes were filled with shame and anger as she stared at the black-clothed man in front of her. The black-clothed man did not have any lewd look in his eyes. He placed his right hand on Xiao Yu's shoulder and a thread of saint energy entered Xiao Yu's body. Puchi! Xiao Yu spat out a mouthful of blood. Her beautiful face was pale and bloodless. She stared at the black-clothed man in front of her with shame and anger. The black-clothed man did not pay any attention to Xiao Yu. Instead, he continued to pour saint energy into Xiao Yu's body. So hot! Suddenly, Xiao Yu's face flushed red. She could not help but moan. Soon after, a fiery red mark appeared on her collarbone. If one were to look at it carefully, this fiery red mark was like 9 suns. It was arranged in a specific path. As expected, you have the 9 suns physique. Sir Manager's guess was accurate. You are indeed the descendant of the 9 suns heavenly monarch. Ha! The heavens reward those who persevere. The black-clothed man laughed heartily. His right hand moved as he wanted to grab Xiao Yu's neck and take her away. Boom! However, just as the black-clothed man was about to grab Xiao Yu, the floor beneath his feet suddenly collapsed. Soon after, a skinny claw grabbed the black-clothed man's right leg and pulled him down. The black-clothed man was caught off guard and was pulled down by the claw. Fortunately, most of the people in the Peace Inn had been knocked out by the dream of an eternity. Therefore, it did not cause much of a commotion. Boom! The black-clothed man reacted quickly. He threw out a punch and forced the owner of the skinny claw back. The black-clothed man took a few steps back and stared coldly at the old man in front of him. He said, "It seems like you are also a remnant of the 9 Suns Heavenly Monarchs faction. I did not expect that you would dare to open an inn in the Blood Jade County. It was really difficult for us to find you. Who are you? Who sent you here? Could it be Xue Hentian?" Opposite the black-clothed man was a white-haired old man. He was Xiao Yu's grandfather and the shopkeeper of the Peace Inn. At this moment, the white-haired old man's face was extremely solemn. The mansion master does not know about this. It was the head steward who sent me to test her. I did not expect that the little girl really has the 9 Suns constitution. You are all remnants of the 9 Suns Heavenly Monarchs faction. You are all finished. The black-clothed man sneered. The white-haired old man's eyes were gloomy. After he checked Xiao Yu's room and found that she was fine, he heaved a sigh of relief. You are really despicable. You actually used sleeping incense in my inn. The white-haired old man said coldly. Hee, don't you know that the one who strikes first has the advantage? Moreover, I know that you have also been poisoned by the dream of an eternity. How much strength can you use now? The black-clothed man sneered. The white-haired old man's eyes were gloomy. He said coldly, It is enough to deal with you. Ha, what a joke. The black-clothed man raised his head and laughed. His eyes instantly became gloomy and cold. Then he disappeared on the spot like a puff of green smoke. When he appeared again, he was still in front of the white-haired old man. His hand was extremely fast and it was like lightning. In an instant his hand imprinted on the white-haired old man's chest. The white-haired old man roared and pushed out his right hand. Terrifying Saint Power was pushed out and he wanted to block the black-clothed man's attack. Pucci. Unfortunately, the white-haired old man, who had been drugged by the sleeping incense, was at a disadvantage. The instant he blocked the black-clothed man's attack, his defense crumbled inch by inch. That open hand imprinted itself on the old man's chest unimpeded. The old man spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. The direction that the white-haired old man was sent flying was coincidentally the room that Fun was staying in. Grandfather! Xiao Yu's beautiful eyes were shocked and she could not help but scream. Rumble! The white-haired old man smashed into the floor above, passing through it and landing in a room. Chapter 1612. A drop of yellow spring pucci. The white-haired old man spat out a mouthful of blood as his entire body trembled. He wanted to stand up, but due to his heavy injuries and the effect of the dream of eternity, he no longer had the strength to fight. Hee, old fart, you've been hit by the dream of eternity and now you've even received my full strength attack. Even if your cultivation has reached the profound glimpse Saint Realm, you're already an arrow at the end of its flight. You're not my opponent at all. The black-clothed man laughed nastily as he took a step forward. His speed was as fast as lightning as he charged towards the white-haired old man. No, grandfather. Xiao Yu's face was filled with tears as she clenched her fists tightly. However, due to the knockout incense, she couldn't move at all. She could only watch as the black-clothed man got closer and closer to the white-haired old man. At this moment, Xiao Yu hated herself for being weak more and more. If she had powerful strength, she wouldn't have been hit by the dream of eternity and wouldn't be like this, where she could only watch her grandfather fight in front of her while she was powerless to do anything. The white-haired old man barely propped himself up. The veins on his face bulged as beads of sweat dripped down from his forehead. It was as if he was enduring unbearable pain. However, he soon discovered that there was someone else in the room. Furthermore, this person wasn't affected by the dream of eternity and had fainted. Instead, he was full of energy. The white-haired old man stared at Jun, who had stood up from the bed, in astonishment and couldn't help but exclaim, "Guest, it's you!" However, the white-haired old man soon saw another figure in the room. This figure's entire body was covered in golden veins that overflowed with golden light. It was like the sun, extremely blazing and dazzling. Moreover, this figure's appearance was exactly the same as Zhuowen, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed. Without a doubt, this golden figure was probably this person's external incarnation. Moreover, what made the white-haired old man even more astonished was that this guest who had stayed in a few days ago wasn't affected by the dream of eternity at all. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and kept his external incarnation into the Azure Dragon Hall. However, his gaze was extremely gloomy. Earlier, he was meditating, and he had set up a powerful restriction around the room, so he was fully immersed in his cultivation and did not deliberately sense the outside world. Yet now, the battle between the white-haired old man and the black-robed man had directly broken through his seals, rousing him from his cultivation state. His clones had been completely exposed as well. This had crossed his bottom line. Although Zhuowen appeared to be rather calm on the surface, his heart was erupting with fury like a volcano. Hee, 9 suns heavenly venerates remnants, die. Once I'm done with you, I'll bring back that little girl with the bloodline of the 9 sons heavenly monarch. That'll be a great merit. At this moment, the black-clothed man's speed was as fast as lightning. He instantly swept into Zhuowen's room. Although he had also noticed Jun, who had stood up, the black-clothed man's speed was as fast as lightning. Although the black-clothed man was rather surprised that this person had not been affected by the dream of an eternity, the aura on Zhuowen's body was not strong, so he did not pay too much attention to it. Once he was done with the white-haired old man, he would deal with this guy who didn't know what was good for him. At this thought, the black-clothed man's speed increased. His right hand was like a poisonous snake as it cut through the void and turned into a knife hand. Instantly, a sharp and terrifying knife chi erupted from his knife hand, intending to completely bury the white-haired old man. The white-haired old man's expression changed slightly. He clenched his right hand and was about to use a desperate move when a slender figure slowly walked in front of him. "Dear guest." The white-haired old man was rather stunned. The black-clothed man also saw the young man in front of the white-haired old man. His gaze was extremely dark as he coldly said, "Ungrateful fellow, you actually dare to stop me from killing someone. You are simply courting death. Fine, I'll kill you first and take that old man's life later." The black-clothed man's momentum did not diminish. His knife hand instantly swept over, aiming at Zhuowen's heart and violently drilling into it. However, when the knife hand was just a few inches away from Zhuowen's heart, the black-clothed man was stunned to find that his knife hand could no longer move forward. This was because Zhuowen's right hand had reached out and firmly grasped his own right hand. This hand was like an iron hoop that firmly grasped his right hand, making it impossible for him to move even if he wanted to. "What? Let go of me!" The black-clothed man roared loudly as the saint energy in his body gushed out. This black-clothed man's saint energy contained the law of wind. Gusts of wind roared and formed a cyclone that directly attacked Jun. Unfortunately, the moment the black-clothed man's saint energy gushed out, it was violently twisted by Jun. The saint energy that swept out was immediately annihilated by the intense pain. "Kacha!" Jun showed no mercy. With a rip of his right hand, a majestic saint energy that was like a mountain crushed down. Suddenly, the black-clothed man's right hand was directly torn off. Blood spurted out like a torrential rain, splattering all over the sky. "Ah!" The black-clothed man cried out in agony as he retreated, trying to escape from this place. However, Zhuowen's speed was much faster than him. His right hand reached out and grabbed the black-clothed man's neck from behind. With a violent swing, the black-clothed man was ruthlessly thrown onto the ground like a piece of trash. Boom! The black-clothed man was directly embedded into the ground tens of meters deep. A mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth. The meridians in his body were all ruptured by Zhuowen's saint energy, leaving him with only a single breath left. All of this happened in an instant. Before the white-haired old man and Xiao Yu could even react, the black-clothed man who was full of vigor was beaten by Zhuon to the point that he could not even fight back. The white-haired old man's body trembled as he looked at Zhuowen's back. His eyes were filled with fear and dread. The black-clothed man's cultivation was similar to his, at the glimpse profound saint realm. Even if the white-haired old man was not hit by the eternal dream, he might not be able to defeat the black-clothed man. However, this guest who had just moved in not long ago was able to beat the black-clothed man to the brink of death in just a few breaths of time. What kind of strength did he need to achieve this? Moreover, the white-haired old man could not help but think of the external incarnation that he had seen in the room earlier that was covered with golden veins. He could feel that the strange external incarnation gave him a sense of crisis that was even more terrifying than the young man in front of him. At this moment, the zombie-faced young man in front of him seemed rather mysterious in the eyes of the white-haired old man. So strong. Through the gap in the room, Xiao Yu had also seen the battle just now. After she came back to her senses, her beautiful eyes glowed as she stared at Zhuo Wen's back. "Sir, this subordinate is useless. I was hit by the sleeping incense." At this moment, Long Tian staggered out of the room. His footsteps were weak, his body was weak, and his face was filled with shame. "It's okay. The sleeping incense's effect has a certain limit. Go back and rest well. The effects of the medicine should be gone by tomorrow, Zhuan said as he took a step forward. With a suction force from his right hand, the black-clothed man embedded more than 10 meters deep in the ground was suddenly pulled out by him. Who sent you? Why did you disturb my cultivation? Zhuan said coldly. The mask on the black-clothed man's face had already fallen off. He stared at Zhuan in front of him and repeatedly shook his head. Sir, please spare my life. This subordinate's target was not you. This subordinate's target was the old man and the girl. The one who disturbed your cultivation was that old man. He was the one who broke into your room and disturbed your peace. At this moment, the black-clothed man was complaining incessantly. If he knew that such a fiend was staying in the Peace Inn, he would not have dared to enter the inn alone. In fact, the black-clothed man couldn't be blamed. The Peace Inn was the cheapest inn in the Blood Jade County. The cultivators who stayed there were mostly at the bottom of the Blood Jade County. It was impossible for there to be any powerful cultivators. This was also the reason why the black-clothed man was so fearless and came to the Peace Inn alone to test Xiao Yu's strength. If he knew that there was such a strong expert like Zhuan in the Peace Inn, he would rather die than come here alone. Bullshit, if it wasn't for you, would I have disturbed this, sir? The white-haired old man's expression changed slightly and he could not help but angrily shout. Zhuan's expression did not change as he coldly stared at the black-clothed man. A burst of murderous intent burst out, causing the black-clothed man's hair to stand on end. The black-clothed man was silent for a moment before he said in a deep voice, Sir, let me live and I will tell you the purpose of my visit. You are not qualified to bargain in front of me. Zhuan's eyes revealed an impatient expression as he stretched out his right hand. Suddenly, a huge yellow spring shadow gushed out from the void behind him. The yellow spring shadow instantly engulfed the black-clothed man. The black-clothed man's body trembled and twitched continuously. In the end, his body shriveled up and turned into a shriveled corpse. The yellow spring shadow swept over and disappeared into the void. On Zhuan's palm, there was a drop of yellow liquid floating. This drop of liquid contained a dense death intent. Within this death intent, it was as if life and death were alternating in this drop of liquid, forming a balance as if it was a reincarnation cycle. Legend has it that the yellow spring was a river in the depths of the netherworld. The yellow spring could cross one's life and death. It contained the truth of reincarnation. There was a different kind of balance between life and death. Controlling the yellow spring meant that one could live or die. In between life and death, one could become the supreme ruler. Just now, one used the yellow spring shadow from the slaughtering finger of yellow spring to kill the black-clothed man. He used the black-clothed man's energy to form this drop of yellow spring. So that's how it is. By using the slaughtering finger of yellow spring to kill people, one can refine them into the yellow spring. If one has committed grave sins, does it mean that one can obtain more yellow spring droplets? Zhuan licked his lips as his eyes revealed a hint of excitement. He finally knew why the slaughtering finger of yellow spring had such a low threshold as an immortal art. The purpose of this immortal art was to let you kill and cultivate more yellow spring droplets. If a yellow spring was formed in the end, the power of this immortal art would probably shock the entire world. Of course, this path was naturally filled with uncertainty. After all, killing a person only allowed one drop of yellow spring to be formed. To form a huge yellow spring, how many lives would it take? Chapter 16:13. The tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. Looking at the corpse of the black-clothed man, the white-haired old man and Xiao Yu were both startled and terrified. The young man in front of them acted decisively. His vicious and merciless way of doing things had completely shocked the two of them. The white-haired old man cried bitterly in his heart. He didn't expect this young man to be such a vicious and merciless fiend. If this young man wanted to kill him and his grandson, he would only need to move his finger. Just as the white-haired old man was on tenterhooks, Yuan turned his head and said to the white-haired old man, "Shopkeeper, prepare another room for me. I can't stay in this room anymore." The white-haired old man was startled, but soon after his eyes were filled with ecstasy. He quickly replied, "Sir is right. This old man will prepare a new room for you. The meaning of Zhuowen's words was very clear. He didn't want to pursue the responsibility. Moreover, after seeing Zhuowen's powerful strength, the white-haired old man worked especially hard. Although he was drugged, he was still a glimpse profound saint. His basic movements weren't a problem at all. After preparing a new room, the white-haired old man was about to leave to check on Xiao Yu's situation, but he was stopped by Zhuon. The white-haired old man didn't dare to neglect and asked, "May I know what Sir wants? Who is the 9 Suns' heavenly monarch? What relationship do you and Xiao Yu have with the former? Also, who is the black-clothed man below? Why did he come to kill you?" Zhuon sat on the bed and stared at the white-haired old man as he spoke unhurriedly. The white-haired old man's face stiffened, and he revealed a hesitant expression. "If you don't want to follow in the footsteps of the black-clothed man, you'd better answer my question truthfully." A murderous intent instantly locked onto the white-haired old man, causing him to tremble. In the end, the white-haired old man gritted his teeth and said, "Sir, there's no harm in telling you this. After all, you killed the black-clothed man. Xiao Yu and I can't stay here any longer." That black-clothed man was sent by the blood-refining manor's head steward, Song Feng. His purpose was to test whether Xiao Yu has a 9-yang constitution. Furthermore, Xiao Yu's 9-yang physique has been discovered. Now that the black-clothed man has been killed today, the head steward of the blood-refining manor, Song Feng, will likely place his suspicions on the Peace Inn. After tonight, I plan to dismiss the Peace Inn. Speaking up to here, the white-haired old man sighed inwardly. He and Xiao Yu had kept a low profile in the Blood Jade County for over 10 years, but in the end, they were still discovered by the people of the blood-refining mansion. Zhuon did not say a word. He silently looked at the white-haired old man, waiting for him to continue. The white-haired elder pondered for a moment before continuing. "The 9 Suns' heavenly monarch is this old man's master and also the previous manor lord of the blood refinement manor. Shui Hentian is merely a servant of the heavenly monarch. However, this dog servant, Shui Hentian, was exceptionally talented and was highly regarded by the heavenly monarch. Later on, the heavenly monarch went on an expedition to other prefectures and was heavily injured. He had no choice but to go into seclusion when he returned. However, Shui Hentian plotted a rebellion and actually ambushed the heavily injured heavenly monarch. In the end, the heavenly monarch fell. In order to ascend to the position of manor lord, Shui Hentian colluded with the other commanders of the blood-refining manor to force the heavenly monarch to abdicate and exterminate all the descendants of the heavenly monarch. This old man was lucky back then and coincidentally brought Miss to play in other prefectures. That was how we managed to escape this calamity. However, Shui Hentian was still haunting us. He knew that Miss has a 9-yang constitution, so he has been searching for Miss's whereabouts ever since. Later on, Shui Hentian's men pressured us so much that this old man took the risk and brought Miss to the capital to live in seclusion. Speaking up to here, the white-haired old man sighed deeply and said, "However, this seclusion has been broken. Miss and I will have to travel to the ends of the world again. I don't know if we can escape Shui Hentian's pursuit this time." Zhuon looked deeply at the white-haired old man. After confirming that the old man was not lying, he slowly withdrew his killing intent. "It turns out that there is such a secret between you two," Zhuon muttered in a low voice. Then he waved his sleeve and said, "Since that's the case, this matter has nothing to do with me. Both of you can leave." Zhuon did not want to be involved in this matter. After all, he did not have any relationship with the white-haired old man and Xiao Yu. Thus, he had no reason to help them. After all, the manor lord of the blood-refining manor, Shui Hentian, was a heaven-defying saint stage expert. Moreover, Shui Hentian possessed an earthly immortal saint artifact. Even if Zhuon used his trump card, he might not be a match for such an existence. Of course, Zhuon had the Azure Dragon Palace. If he wanted to escape, Shui Hentian would not be able to kill Zhuon even if he had an earthly immortal saint artifact. However, the Azure Dragon Palace was of great importance. Moreover, the Azure Dragon Taoist Master was a famous saint 10,000 years ago. Thus, Many old men in the central region would be able to recognize the Azure Dragon Palace. Unless it was a last resort, one would not take out such a precious treasure. The tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. The white-haired old man struggled but did not get up. He stared at John with bright eyes and finally said, "My lord, I have a presumptuous request. I wonder if you can agree to it?" The zombie-faced young man in front of him had terrifying strength. Moreover, the white-haired old man would never forget the external embodiment that he saw in Zhuowen's room. Based on his experience, the external embodiment gave him a terrifying sense of danger. It almost made him unable to breathe. There was no doubt that this young man's external embodiment was much more terrifying than this young man's original body. "You want me to help you kill Xue Hentian and take back the blood-refining mansion? If it's such a rude request, you'd better give up this idea. You should run for your lives." "Don't involve me," Zhuowen said lightly. The white-haired old man did not give up. He continued, "My lord, do you know why Xue Hentian is looking for my lady? Isn't it because of the 9-yang constitution?" Zhuowen asked. "Yes, but do you know what the 9-yang constitution does?" The white-haired old man seemed to have made up his mind. Looking at the white-haired old man's appearance, Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and said, "Is there something special about the 9-yang constitution?" The earthly immortal sacred artifact in Xue Hentian's hands is called the 9-yang Dao sword. The 9-yang Heaven Lord spent a lot of effort and thousands of years to refine the essence of the noon sun. He used the essence of the sun as the material to forge the 9 Dao swords. Back then, if the Heaven Lord had not trusted Xue Hentian so much that Xue Hentian took advantage of the opportunity to launch a sneak attack, even if the Heaven Lord was seriously injured, he would not have been able to do anything to him. The white-haired old man continued, "Although Xue Hentian obtained the 9-yang Dao sword, he was unable to unleash the power of the Dao sword. As far as I know, he could only forcefully use the first Yang Dao sword and barely use the remaining 8 Yang Dao swords. As my lady has the 9-yang constitution, she is naturally compatible with the 9-yang Dao sword. If you control my lady, you will be able to unleash the full power of the 9-yang Dao sword and unleash the true power of the earthly immortal sacred artifact." Zhuowen's eyes flickered, but he sneered and said, "And then? Even the first Yang Dao sword has the power of an earthly immortal sacred artifact. It is not something an ordinary warrior can withstand. You want me to help you? Are you trying to send me to my death?" The white-haired old man waved his hand and said, "My lord, you have misunderstood. If my lady was present, she would be able to control the 9-yang Dao sword and prevent Xue Hentian from using it. Without the 9-yang Dao sword, Xue Hentian would lose a great help. If my lord can help me and my lady, we will naturally reward you. Moreover, this old man will also give you one of the 9-yang Dao swords as a reward for this." Zhuowen revealed a thoughtful expression, but his heart was moved. If Xue Hentian was unable to use the 9-yang Dao sword, perhaps he could really give it a try. Moreover, Yun was also surprised that the white-haired old man was willing to give him one of the 9-yang Dao swords. After all, if the 9-yang Dao sword was dismantled, the earthly immortal sacred artifact would no longer be complete. At that time, the power of the 9-yang Dao sword would be greatly reduced. However, Yun also knew that the white-haired old man had no other choice. After all, it was really difficult for ordinary things to move Zhuowen. Only an earthly immortal sacred artifact was extremely attractive to him. Even if it was only a part of an earthly immortal sacred artifact, its power was much stronger than a heaven-defying saint artifact. "What do you think, my lord?" The white-haired old man was a little worried. He was afraid that the young man in front of him would refuse. After all, the latter was his last hope. Moreover, his intuition told him that the young man in front of him was extremely extraordinary. Perhaps, the young man could really help him and his lady out of this predicament. This was the white-haired old man's gamble with his life. If he gambled correctly, he might be able to reclaim the blood-refining mansion. If he gambled wrongly, he would die. Now, he could only gamble because he and Xiao Yu were already suspected. Next, the two of them would have to face countless experts from the blood-refining mansion. How could the two of them be a match for the blood-refining mansion? Therefore, he placed all his hopes on the young man in front of him. This was also his last resort. Okay, but the reward has to be changed. I need 2 9-Yang-Dao swords. One is the first Yang-Dao sword and the other is the 9th Yang-Dao sword, Zhuan said indifferently. The white-haired old man's face turned slightly pale. In the end, he sighed and agreed to Zhuowen's request. He had no other choice now. My lord, this old man is called Fanonfu. You can call me Old Fu. May I know my lord's name? After the two of them reached an agreement, the white-haired old man began to worm his way into being friends. Mu Zhua, Zhuan said faintly. Brother Mu, our forces are weak. We can't fight against the army of the blood-refining mansion. As long as you have the opportunity to sneak into the mansion and get close to Xue Hentian, the lady will be by your side. At that time, all you have to do is to kill Xue Hentian. At that time, the lady will control the 9 Yang-Dao sword. At that time, no one in the blood-refining mansion will dare to disobey. After all, the 9 Yang-Dao sword is the symbol of the blood-refining mansion master, the white-haired old man said with a smile. Chapter 1614. Qin Cong, my lord possesses a spatial saint artifact? Elder Fu was stunned at first, but soon after, he was overjoyed. If Zhuan truly possessed a spatial saint artifact, then he and Xiaoyu wouldn't have to wander around and hide. The young man before him possessed terrifying strength, so hiding in the former's spatial saint artifact was undoubtedly the best choice. Use this sandalwood first. Wake up everyone in the inn and arrange for them to leave. After that, I'll bring you into the spatial saint artifact. Yuan waved his sleeve and tossed a thumb-sized cube to Elder Fu. This cube faintly emitted a fragrance. Smelling this fragrance, Elder Fu's exhaustion instantly dissipated. The effects of the dream of an eternity seemed to have been dispelled by a lot. Thank you, my lord. Elder Fu bowed and hurried out of the room. After Elder Fu left, Yuan didn't inform Long Tian. Instead, he walked to the window and silently looked at the slightly white sky. He knew that dawn was approaching and he would have to make a trip to the Blood General Pavilion. Don't. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Zhuan knitted his brows and indifferently said, "The door isn't locked. Come in." Just as he finished speaking, the door creaked open, and a delicate and pretty face peeked out a little timidly. Then, this person tiptoed into the room. Her eyes were as bright as the stars as she stared at Zhuan. In the depths of her eyes, there was a feeling of worship. "Miss Xiaoyu, what brings you here?" Zhuan had his hands behind his back as he turned around and indifferently stared at the delicate and pretty girl before him. There was no doubt that the first thing Elder Fu did after obtaining the sandalwood was to remove the sleeping incense on Xiaoyu. Otherwise, Xiaoyu wouldn't have been able to find Zhuowen's room so quickly. "I heard from Grandpa Fu that your name is Mu Zhua. Can I call you Big Brother Mu?" Xiaoyu seemed a little reserved at this moment. At the same time, she recalled that when Zhuowen and Long Tian left the inn, she reminded them not to waste their cultivation time. This scene constantly appeared in her mind, causing a trace of shame to rise in her heart. The redness spread from her cheeks to the roots of her ears. Thinking about how powerful Zhuowen was and how she actually dared to show off in front of Zhuowen, Xiaoyu's heart was filled with complicated feelings. At the same time, she also felt some worship. "Sure," Zhuowen indifferently said. "Then will Big Brother Mu accept disciples? Big Brother Mu is so powerful, I want to take you as my master." Xiaoyu stuttered. Zhuowen was stunned, and then he shook his head and said, "I don't intend to take any disciples." "Is that so?" Xiaoyu revealed a look of disappointment. Soon after, the two of them fell into a long silence. "However, if you have any problems with your cultivation, you can ask me. I can answer you." Zhuowen slowly turned around and spoke indifferently. Xiaoyu, who was originally disappointed, immediately smiled brightly and said, "Thank you, Big Brother Mu." Zhuowen shook his head. Instead, he looked at the distant sky through the window. Xiaoyu did not disturb Zhuowen. Instead, she silently sat in the room, looking at Zhuowen's slender figure in a daze. After a while, there was another knock on the door. Elder Fu respectfully entered the room and said in a deep voice, "My lord, the guests of the Peace Inn have been dealt with. Since it's done, I'll keep you in my spatial saint artifact. When the time comes, I'll take action." Huan waved his sleeve. A surge of saint energy enveloped Elder Fu and Xiao Yu. Soon after, the two of them disappeared into thin air. The spatial saint artifact that Zhuan mentioned was naturally the Azure Dragon Hall. Although the Azure Dragon Hall was very precious and contained many of Zhuan's secrets, Zhuan was not afraid that Elder Fu and Xiao Yu would know the secrets of the Azure Dragon Hall. After all, Zhuan was the controller of the Azure Dragon Hall. Under his control, Elder Fu and Xiao Yu would not notice the uniqueness of the Azure Dragon Hall. After dealing with this, Zhuan called out to Long Tian and left the Peace Inn. Not long after Zhuan left, a group of cavalrymen on tall horses galloped over and arrived in front of the Peace Inn in an instant. The leader wore black iron armor and carried a black iron spear on his back. His entire body emitted an extraordinary aura. "Search," the black-armored man said indifferently. The cavalrymen behind him dismounted from their horses and rushed into the Peace Inn. After a while, several soldiers carried out a dried corpse from the Peace Inn. "Sir, there's no one in the Peace Inn. I only found a dried corpse." Several soldiers threw the dried corpse in front of the black-armored man. The black-armored man glanced at it and his eyes turned gloomy. He recognized the black-clothed corpse from the Divine Mummy Mountain at a glance. It was the person he had sent out last night. But now, the person he sent out was in such a miserable state. The black-armored man's face turned ugly. "Send someone to investigate this matter. We must find the owner of the Peace Inn and his granddaughter." The black-armored man continued, "Today is the day of the Commander-in-Chief battle. Half of the men will follow me back to the mansion. The other half will search the Blood Azure County and find the two of them." With that, the black-armored man led half of the group away from the Peace Inn, while the other half headed off in another direction. At the entrance of the Blood General Pavilion, Blood Demon was wearing a blood-red robe. Behind him was a group of soldiers in blood-red armor. He stood quietly as if he was waiting for someone. This person is so arrogant. He actually made Sir Blood General wait. He's just a helper. If it wasn't for Sir Blood General's appreciation, how could he have the chance to enter the Blood Refining Mansion? Blood Demon stood proudly with his eyes narrowed. The soldiers in blood-red armor behind him were not convinced and kept complaining. "They're here." Blood Demon suddenly opened his eyes and stared at the corner in front of him. There, two figures were slowly walking over. Blood Devil laughed and strode forward. "I thought you weren't coming, brother. Fortunately, you kept your promise and came. Brother Blood Demon, you're too polite. Amujua. It's my honor to be able to help Brother Blood Demon this time," Zhuan said with a faint smile. Blood Demon squinted his eyes. Zhuan's words had a deeper meaning. He wanted to use the name Mujua. However, Blood Demon was not a person who beat around the bush. He laughed and said, "Brother Mu, you're too polite. It's my honor to be able to receive your help." Today, many generals have arrived at the Blood Refining Mansion. I heard that the remaining 6 Commander-in-Chief have all arrived. This is a grand occasion that has never happened in the Blood Azure County for hundreds of years. Now, Brother Mu, follow me to the Blood Refining Mansion. As he spoke, Blood Demon clapped his right hand. 2 blood-red armor soldiers brought over 2 large horses that had been prepared. Blood Demon took one of the large horses and jumped onto its back. He then pointed at another large horse with his right hand, indicating for Zhuan to sit on it as well. Zhuan nodded and also jumped up. The 2 large horses moved side by side. The blood-red armor soldiers followed closely behind, and Long Tian followed behind too. The Blood Refining Mansion occupied a large area. Moreover, the dense blood qi in the air above the Blood Refining Mansion seemed to be produced by the mansion. The blood qi probably had something to do with Shui Henshin's cultivation method. Otherwise, it would not have caused such a phenomenon. At the entrance of the Blood Refining Mansion, Blood Demon suddenly pulled on the reins and stopped. Blood Demon's gaze was somewhat unfriendly as he stared ahead. As soon as Blood Demon stopped, Zhuan naturally stopped as well. Following Blood Demon's gaze, Zhuan looked ahead. A group of people walked over from the front. Every one of them was wearing bronze armor, and the two people in the lead were also riding tall horses. One of the two people was wearing bronze armor, and his figure was extremely tall and sturdy. His height was almost 10 feet. The person riding the horse next to the burly bronze man was an old man with a slightly stooped back. The old man's face was covered in all kinds of pustules. He looked extremely miserable and nauseating. He is Qing Tsang. He is extremely powerful, and his cultivation is also in the Yang Heaven Saint stage. It is said that his strength is only below the first general. He has the reputation of being the second general. However, due to my sudden rise in recent years, my limelight has temporarily overshadowed his. Therefore, Qing Tsang has always regarded me as a thorn in his side. Blood Demon's voice rang in Zhuowen's sea of consciousness. Zhuowen's eyes slowly narrowed. It seemed that Qing Tsang had come with ill intentions. Qing Tsang licked his lips. His eyes flashed with a trace of cruelty as he said coldly, "Brother Blood General, you've come quite early. However, as the saying goes, a good dog doesn't block the way. Brother Blood General, please make way and let me in first." With that, Qing Tsang ignored Blood Demon. Instead, he kicked the horse's belly and continued to ride toward the entrance of the blood refining mansion. Although the gate of the mansion was quite wide, it could only accommodate 2 tall horses at most. If Qing Tsang and the hunchbacked old man went in, Blood Devil and the others could only wait outside. They could only enter after Qing Tsang and the others went in. This would undoubtedly put Blood Demon's side at a disadvantage. Blood Demon naturally wouldn't let this happen. "Brother Mu, let's go in together. Don't let these 2 vicious dogs get in first. Otherwise, it would be a disgrace to our Blood General Pavilion." Blood Demon laughed. Instead of retreating, he continued to ride his horse forward. Zhuan naturally had no objection and silently followed behind Blood Demon. Qing Tsang's eyes flashed with a cold light. He snorted and sped up. The 2 sides had no intention of avoiding each other. They would definitely collide in the end. The 2 guards of the mansion looked at this scene. Although they wanted to stop it, they were powerless. Both Blood General and Qing Tsang were outstanding among the generals. They were powerless to mediate the conflict between the 2. After all, they were just guards. Blood Demon and Qing Tsang's horses instantly crossed paths. Blood Demon sneered and threw out a punch. Blood Qi spurted out and soared into the sky. Countless blood Qi swam in the air like snakes, making Blood Demon's punch unparalleled. Qing Tsang snorted coldly. His right hand's 10 fingers intertwined and pointed. Suddenly, a cyan Qi burst out like countless sword Qi. It was as if Qing Tsang's 10 fingers contained thousands of sword essences. Boom! Blood Demon's fist energy and Qing Tsang's finger energy instantly intertwined. Immediately after, a crackling sound burst out in the air. An invisible ripple spread out between the 2. This ripple spread out for dozens of feet. Everywhere it touched, the ground and the surrounding buildings were unaffected. Chapter 16:15. Blood Cauldron. Boom! Blood red and cyan energies intertwined with each other, causing a loud explosion. Qing Tsang's expression changed slightly, and the tall horse he was riding staggered back a few steps. Because its hooves couldn't withstand the terrifying collision of internal energies, it directly exploded into a cloud of blood mist. The big horse whined and directly lay on the ground. Qing Tsang's expression was ugly, and he couldn't help but jump up to avoid being embarrassed. On the other hand, the Blood Devil's big horse also whined, and the terrifying internal energy swept towards the big horse's internal organs like a hurricane. The terrifying internal energy was enough to make the big horse under the Blood Devil explode. At that time, the Blood Devil would be even more embarrassed than Qing Tsang. Zhuowen's gaze was calm. With a wave of his sleeve, a wisp of void power swept out. The moment the internal energy was about to reach the big horse's internal organs, the void appeared and directly transmitted the internal energy into the void, while the Blood Devil's big horse was safe and sound. Qing Tsang lightly landed on the ground. His eyes narrowed slightly. First, he looked at the big horse under the Blood Devil, then coldly looked at the zombie-faced young man beside the Blood Devil. In the battle just now, the big horse under the blood devil would have made a fool of itself, but the young man beside the blood devil made a move. He actually transmitted the internal energy into the void, preventing the blood devil from making a fool of himself. This made Qing Tsung a little unhappy, but at the same time, he was a little surprised that the blood devil had found such an extraordinary helper. Compared to Qing Tsung's surprise, the blood devil was also extremely shocked. He and Qing Tsung were both at the Yang Sky Saint stage. Even if the two were just casually exchanging pointers, the internal energy that leaked out wasn't something that an ordinary peak profound sage could resist. However, Zhuowen's cultivation was only at the shattering profound sage stage, but he was able to easily dissolve Qing Tsung's internal energy. This made the blood devil think highly of Zhun. Brother Qing Tsung's strength is indeed extraordinary. With just one move, you made the big horse under you explode. This blood devil is ashamed of his inferiority. At this moment, Blood Demon was feeling rather carefree. Qing Tsung had always viewed him as a thorn in his side. Hence, Qing Tsung had always been targeting him. Moreover, Qing Tsung's strength was extraordinary. Hence, Blood Demon could not do anything to him. But now, thanks to Zhuo Wen's help, Qing Tsung was defeated. Blood Demon felt extremely satisfied and was in a good mood. Qing Tsung's face darkened. He looked coldly at Zhuan and said, "What's your name? Your strength is not bad. You were actually able to annihilate my inner strength. How commendable." Although Qing Tsung said this, his tone was filled with murderous intent. Obviously, he was very unhappy with Zhuowen's behavior. Zhuan glanced at Qing Tsung indifferently. Naturally, he could feel the murderous intent in Qing Tsung's eyes. He sneered in his heart and turned around, ignoring Qing Tsung. This little bastard. Zhuowen's attitude immediately angered Qing Tsung. Qing Tsung took a step forward. A green aura swept out like a storm. Traces of cracks appeared on the ground under his feet. It looked quite terrifying. "General Qing Tsung, this is the entrance of the Shuelian mansion. Do you want to fight?" Blood Demon said coldly. Qing Tsung took a deep breath, and the terrifying qi that had erupted from him slowly receded. He stared coldly at Zhuowen and said, "Blood General, you really found the right person. Anyway, the outcome of the commander-in-chief is already determined. You little bastard." Zhuowen frowned. Qing Tsung's words seemed to have a deeper meaning. There was also a hint of schadenfreude in his words. This made Zhuowen feel that something was wrong. "General Qing Tsung, you talk too much. Brother Mu, let's go in. Some people just like to eat grapes without spitting out the skin." Blood Demon narrowed his eyes and smiled at Zhuan. He pulled the reins and controlled the tall horse to step into the mansion. Zhuan followed behind Blood Demon. However, his eyes contained a cold light. No one knew what Zhuowen was thinking at this moment. After Blood Demon and the others entered the mansion, one of Qing Tsung's subordinates nimbly brought over a tall horse. Jumping on the horse, Qing Tsung waved his hand and led the group into the mansion with a dark look. The Shuelian mansion was huge. In the depths of the mansion, there was a huge square called the Shuelian Plaza. The Shuelian Plaza was tens of thousands of feet wide. In the center of the plaza stood a huge blood cauldron. The blood cauldron was square with 3 legs. It was dozens of feet tall and there were many patterns around the cauldron. There were many patterns, birds and beasts, mountains and rivers, swords and weapons, and ancient people made of animal skin. The surface of the patterns was covered with rust. However, the rust did not obscure the blood cauldron. Instead, it added a sense of vicissitudes to the blood cauldron. This sense of vicissitudes was a feeling that radiated thousands of miles. All the warriors who entered the plaza could not help but be in awe. The blood cauldron was the symbol of the Shuelian mansion. It was neither a sacred weapon nor any treasure. It was just an ordinary cauldron made of some kind of metal. Although it was made of ordinary materials, the blood cauldron was extraordinary. When the Shuelian mansion was first established, the first mansion master used ordinary materials to make the blood cauldron for sacrificial ceremonies and important events. For thousands of years, the blood cauldron had been watered with the blood of countless living beings and carried countless souls. After a long time, The blood cauldron had become extraordinary. Although it was an ordinary cauldron, it had a spirit. With an ordinary cauldron spirit, the blood cauldron could be called a spiritual cauldron. It was said that because the blood cauldron had carried too much blood and killing, it contained endless evil spirits and resentment. Those who did not have a strong will would lose themselves if they got within 100 meters of the blood cauldron. Even those who had a strong will would not lose their minds if they got too close to the blood cauldron. However, they would be greatly affected and their strength would be affected. Only those who had a strong will could bear the terrifying resentment and suppression of the blood cauldron. Swoosh! A stalwart figure suddenly flew over. He was wearing black armor and his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. If one took a closer look, he was the black-armored man who had led the troops to the Peace Inn. The black-armored man's eyes were like torches. He raised his right hand and slammed it on the blood cauldron. Suddenly, an earth-shattering crimson light burst out from the patterns on the blood cauldron. Rumble! A thunderous sound swept out from the blood cauldron. The sound was melodious and long. The mouth of the cauldron spat out a thick crimson light that shot up into the sky and turned into a crimson pillar. The sound of the cauldron accompanied the crimson pillar. It resounded throughout the Shuelian mansion and attracted the attention of countless living beings. The blood cauldron has sounded. The battle for the commander begins. The black-armored man shouted. His voice seemed to merge with the sound of the cauldron and spread across the sky. It spread throughout the Shuelian mansion and attracted everyone's attention. At this moment, all the generals and commanders were attracted. Then, they brought their troops and rushed to the Shuelian mansion. In an instant, the Shuelian mansion became very lively. The sound of people and horses neighing could be heard as iron hooves stomped on the ground. Countless troops and horses flowed into the Shuelian mansion from all directions. The pedestrians on the streets of the Shuelian mansion moved to the sides and stared at the endless stream of troops and horses. They were all stunned. Although many martial artists in the Shuelian mansion knew about the battle for the commander position, they did not expect it to be so lively. It was a grand occasion. Halt! When the sound of the cauldron rang out, Shuemo and his men, who were walking slowly on the main road of the Shuelian mansion, suddenly stopped. The chief steward of the Shuelian mansion has sounded the blood cauldron. It seems that we have come at the right time. Brother Mu, let's hurry to the Shuelian plaza. The blood demon laughed and glanced at Zhuowen. Then he urged his horse to gallop toward the end of the road. Zhuowen followed closely behind, not slowing down at all. After a while, the group arrived at a huge plaza. This plaza was the Shuelian plaza that Shuemo had mentioned. The most eye-catching symbol of the Shuelian plaza was the huge blood cauldron in the middle of the plaza. At this moment, a stalwart black-armored man stood proudly under the blood cauldron. The black-armored man clenched his right fist and knocked on the blood cauldron 3 times. The terrifying sound of the cauldron formed a terrifying pressure in the sky. The pressure was like an angry dragon, roaring and flying in the air. The endless sound of the cauldron radiated in all directions. Moreover, Yun could keenly feel that when the black-armored man knocked on the blood cauldron, an extremely terrifying resentment erupted from the blood cauldron. This resentment was like a landslide or a tsunami, covering the entire plaza. The closer they were to the blood cauldron, the more terrifying the resentment became. Although Zhuan was at the edge of the plaza, he could still feel the resentment floating in the air. It was like a maggot that wanted to enter his mind. However, Zhuowen's willpower was firm. Moreover, his mental strength was extremely strong. With just a thought, the resentment dissipated. Shuemo stood tall and faced the resentment head-on. His blood-red hair fluttered in the wind, but he remained motionless like a rock. Long Tian's cultivation was not weak. Naturally, he could resist the resentment. However, the soldiers in the blood-red armor who had followed him all revealed painful expressions. They were unable to resist the erosion of the resentment. All of you can leave now. Go to other places in the mansion and wait for me. Shuemo waved his hand and said to the soldiers in the blood-red armor behind him. The soldiers in the blood-red armor were submissive. They cupped their hands at Shuemo and left the plaza as if they were fleeing. The Blood Refinement Plaza was the most important place in the Blood Refinement Mansion. At the same time, It was also the place where people with weak strength were most unwilling to enter. This was because the resentment of the blood cauldron was not something that ordinary warriors could withstand. Brother Mu, the blood cauldron is the core of the blood refinement plaza. Only during important events will the blood refinement mansion's chief steward, Song Feng, knock on it 3 times. However, the blood cauldron's main purpose was to offer sacrifices. After thousands of years, too many creatures have been sacrificed. Therefore, the blood cauldron has produced an extremely terrifying resentment. Brother Mu, you probably don't know about the other purpose of the blood cauldron, right? This cauldron has another purpose. It is the key to open the blood refinement divine pond. Chapter 1616. Supervisor Tsong Feng, Brother Blood Demon, didn't you say that Shui Hentian would only bring the blood refining divine pond into the blood refining divine pond after the 2 commanders are selected? How did the blood cauldron become the key to the blood refining divine pond? Zhuan asked with a frown. Blood Demon smiled and said, the blood cauldron is the key to the blood refining divine pond, but the conditions to open it are extremely harsh. It is said that the blood cauldron will open the entrance to the blood refining divine pond if one can ring the blood cauldron 20 times and withstand the massive amount of resentment erupting from the blood cauldron. In the entire blood refining mansion, only Mansion Master Shui Hentian can ring the blood cauldron 20 times and successfully enter the blood refining divine pond. Even the number 1 commander, who has reached the heaven-defying Saint Realm, only managed to ring the blood cauldron 19 times. Therefore, if you want to enter the blood refining divine pond, only the Mansion Master can bring you in. It is basically impossible to open the blood refining divine pond by yourself. Speaking of this, Blood Demon's eyes fell on the blood cauldron again with a hint of dread. The blood cauldron was unusual. He had tried it before and only managed to ring it 5 times. This time, his cultivation had improved, so his result would be much better than last time. He was confident that he could ring it 8 times this time. 8 times was already a terrifying result. At least, it was difficult for most of the generals to reach this level. Zhuan nodded to show that he understood. Then he looked around the square. He saw that in the east of the square, there was a huge 9-story trapezoidal overpass. On the overpass, there were rows of tables and comfortable seats. Many high-level officials of the blood refining mansion slowly walked over from the east. They chose their own tables and sat down. There was only 1 seat at the top of the overpass. There were 2 rows of graceful maids standing on both sides of the seat. The seat was empty. It was prepared for Mansion Master Shui Hentian. There were similar overpasses on the north and south sides of the square. However, these 2 overpasses only had 8 stories. There were still rows of tables with a variety of fine wines and dishes on them. The high-ranking officials and dignitaries of the blood refining manor and the other counties of the blood refining manor took their seats with their women. Teasing sounds could be heard from time to time. It was quite lively. There were only 8 seats on both the north and south sides of the elevated platform. These 8 seats were prepared for the 8 commanders of the blood refining mansion. However, since 2 of the commanders had fallen, 2 of these 8 seats would inevitably become vacant. As time passed, more and more people began to take their seats on the elevated platforms around the square. The noise also began to become noisy as discussions continued. Those who could enter the blood refining mansion to watch the commander-in-chief battle were basically high-ranking officials and dignitaries. It could be said that no one on Duga was an ordinary person. They all represented a certain level of power. Blood Devil and Zhuan quietly stood in a secluded corner of the plaza. The 2 of them did not attract anyone's attention. After all, the 2 of them did not stand out, so how could they be recognized? Zhuan also heard some of the discussions around him. In this commander-in-chief battle, I'm afraid that the first General Stonebreak will inevitably occupy one of the vacancies. I'm afraid that the first general will also be Stonebreak. No, the second General Azure Horizon is not weak. After all, he was the closest existence to the first General Stonebreak among all the generals. Have you forgotten about the Blood General who has been in the limelight recently? It is said that the Blood General suddenly rose up in the blood refining county. I've never heard of this person before, nor have I ever seen him. But when he appeared, he shook the heavens and shook the earth. Many generals are not his match. Even Azure Horizon views the Blood General as a thorn in his side. Besides these three, the third General Yao Lian is a female general and has been defeated by the Blood General. But her strength cannot be underestimated. The fourth General Demon Shine went into seclusion a long time ago and only just came out. I'm afraid that his strength has skyrocketed. He won't be easy to deal with. The sounds of discussion were like a storm, constantly reverberating around the square. Everyone was guessing who would obtain the final 2 commander-in-chief positions in this commander-in-chief battle. Of course, most people believed that the 2 commander-in-chief positions would inevitably appear among the Blood General, Stonebreak, and Azure Horizon. After all, the 3 of them were indeed recognized as the 3 strongest generals. Suddenly, 6 gusts of wind swept in from outside the square. The gusts of wind were like pillars that supported the heavens and penetrated the earth. They looked exceptionally terrifying. In the gusts of wind, an extremely terrifying pressure gushed out, crushing down from the sky. Many people's minds trembled, their expressions were aghast, and a feeling of worship rose in their hearts. Zhuan's eyes were like torches. Through the gusts of wind, he saw 6 stalwart figures in each of the 6 gusts of wind. Those 6 people are the 6 commander-in-chief. Their strength is terrifying, especially the first general. His cultivation is the closest to the palace masters. The blood demon also raised his head. His eyes fell on one of the 6 gusts of wind, a black hurricane. This black hurricane was far more terrifying than the other 5 gusts of wind. Wherever the black hurricane passed, all life was extinguished. The green grass withered, and the trees withered. In this black hurricane, there was a figure with fluttering black hair. A pair of black eyes, like a peerless demon, was cold and emotionless. This was the first general, a powerful existence closest to the palace master, Shui Hentian. Even the blood demon was a little wary of him. Of course, Zhuan only sensed a hint of wariness from the blood demon's eyes. There was no fear, as if there was a trace of battle intent. Previously, from the blood demon's words, Zhuan knew that the blood demon should belong to a powerful force, and this force should also be in the blood refining mansion. After all, the blood demon had been so seriously injured, but he had been able to recover to the Sun Sky Saint Realm in such a short time. Without the help of an expert and a powerful force, the blood demon could not have achieved what he had now. Therefore, Zhuan was actually quite wary of the blood demon. After all, there was probably a powerful force behind the blood demon. However, the blood demon had hidden very well and did not reveal any information about the force behind him. The 6 commanders were extremely fast. In an instant, they swept to the top of the elevated platforms on the north and south sides of the square and sat down. With the arrival of the 6 commanders, the originally noisy square quietened down. Everyone's eyes were filled with respect. The commanders were above the general and below the palace master. They held the power of millions of soldiers and the power of several counties. It could be said that these 6 people stood at the peak of the blood refining mansion. How could the surrounding people not respect them? The moment the first general sat down, he raised his head and narrowed his eyes. It was as if he was not interested in anything. Blood General, Shirlai has already reserved a position for the commander-in-chief. The second position belongs to me, Qing Tsang. I think you're a smart person. If you don't want to die, you'd better withdraw from the competition. A somewhat ear-piercing voice rang out. Shui Mo and Zhuo Wen furrowed their brows. They turned their heads and saw Qing Tsang walking over with a stooped old man. His body carried a savage and ferocious aura. Qing Tsang stopped 3 meters away from the blood demon. His eyes were cold as he said, "Blood General, you have only been a general for a few years and your background is unknown. Although I don't know why the palace master promoted you to general, I advise you not to provoke me. Otherwise, you will die a horrible death." The blood demon narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, "If you really have the strength to kill me, then you can take my life in the commander battle. I'm afraid you don't have the strength." Qing Tsang sneered and said, "You will regret it." As he spoke, Qin Song's eyes looked past the blood demon and finally landed on Jun. He continued, "Blood General, next time, control the dog beside you. Don't let him bite anywhere. If we were not at the entrance of the blood refining mansion today, I'm afraid you would have lost a good dog." Zhuowen shifted his gaze and stared coldly at Qin Song. "You keep saying that others are dogs, but I think you're more like a dog. You're the one who barks the loudest and most cheerfully here." Creak. Qin Song suddenly clenched his fingers. Green qi lingered on his fingertips. The wild qi in his body became more and more terrifying, almost soaring to the sky. It immediately attracted the attention of many people in the square. Isn't that the second general, Qin Song? And the blood general who is in the limelight? These two seem to contradict each other. That's not right. Qin Song doesn't seem to be targeting the blood general, but the person beside the blood general. That person looks unfamiliar. He should be the blood general's helper. If you provoke Qin Song, even the blood general will suffer. This helper is not well known. Judging from his qi, he is only in the shattering mystery saint realm. This kind of cultivation is simply a burden. Many people's attention shifted from Qin Song to Zhuan. When they saw that Zhuowen's qi was weak and was only in the shattering mystery saint realm, they were all shocked. Many people even showed a gloating expression. They knew that the blood general's chances of winning the commander battle were slim if he found such a person. Trash in the shattering mystery saint realm. Do you think you are the best in the world just because you destroyed the blood general's internal strength? Today I, Qin Song, will teach you a lesson. As he spoke, Qin Song stepped out and stretched out his 10 fingers. The green qi on his fingertips was so dense that it was terrifying. Countless green sword qi burst out and rushed toward Jun. Blood Demon's eyes were gloomy. He suddenly punched out. Blood qi floated like boiling magma. There was a touch of heat in the blood. Boom! The blood light and the green light collided. The ground between them instantly cracked. However, the two restrained most of their strength and did not cause too much damage. Blood Demon and Qin Song separated as soon as they collided. Then they both retreated dozens of steps. Their eyes were extremely serious. "Blood General, you forced me to do this." Qin Song's eyes were red. The green qi on his body was so dense that it was almost solid. A terrifying qi swept over the entire square. Blood Demon's eyes became much more serious, but there was a sneer at the corner of his mouth. Stop. Chapter 16-17. 9 Sundao Sword. Qin Song's expression changed slightly. He groaned under the pressure and took a few steps back. "Chief Steward." Blood Demon cupped his hands together and said calmly. The black-armored man was the chief steward of the blood refining mansion, Song Feng, who had knocked on the blood cauldron earlier. Song Feng's gaze was extremely cold. He nodded slightly at Blood Demon before his gaze landed on Qin Song. "Qin Song, aren't you a little too bold? The commander battle has yet to begin and you've already acted on your own accord. Are you ignoring the rules of the blood refining mansion?" Song Feng's gaze was sharp as he said coldly. Cold sweat broke out on Qin Song's forehead. Song Feng was the chief steward of the blood refining mansion. His strength was unfathomable. It was said that he was a heaven-defying saint stage expert. Song Feng was extremely loyal to Xue Hentian, so he was deeply trusted by Xue Hentian. In the blood refining mansion, Song Feng was second only to the mansion master. Song Feng was considered an influential figure in the blood refining mansion. After all, he was Xue Hentian's favorite. Although his prestige was not as high as the first commander's, his authority was above the first commander's. Qin Song hurriedly cupped his hands together and said cautiously, "I wouldn't dare." "Please calm down, Chief Steward. This is a warning. There will be no next time. Before the commander battle, you are not allowed to fight. However, don't blame me for being merciless." After Song Feng finished speaking, he glanced at Zhuowen, who was behind Blood Demon. Then, he leaped up and landed beside the blood cauldron in the middle. Song Feng's cultivation is extremely strong. He should be at the initial heaven-defying saint stage. He should be on par with Zhao Ku from the prophet family who chased after you previously. Zhuan narrowed his eyes. Xiao Hei's solemn voice rang out in his mind. Zhuan nodded. His heart was filled with dread towards Congfeng. Furthermore, the black-clothed man that he had killed in the peace-in yesterday should have been sent by Congfeng. However, from the looks of it, Congfeng probably didn't know that Zhuan was the one who killed the black-clothed man. Qing Cong coldly glared at the blood demon and Zhuan, then walked to the side with his helpers. Obviously, he did not want to be near the blood demon and Zhuan. At this moment, more and more people gathered in the square. At the same time, they approached the edge of the square. Many armored generals brought their helpers to the edge of the square. All the generals were filled with fighting spirit. Their eyes were filled with lofty aspirations. They rubbed their shoulders and rubbed their palms together. They all wanted to perform well in this battle. If they could obtain the position of commander, it would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for them. That's the third general, Yao Lian. His strength is not ordinary, and his helper is very powerful. He's actually from the Yang Sky Saint Realm? The blood demon looked around and suddenly pointed at a beautiful figure at the edge of the square as he spoke to Zhuan. However, the blood demon frowned when he discovered that the helper beside Yao Lian was also in the Sun Sky Sacred Realm. Generally speaking, the stronger a general was, the more powerful he would be able to find powerful helpers. After all, these generals had been in office for a long time and had a wide network. However, the blood demon had only been in office for a few years, so the number of experts he knew was extremely limited. There was almost no one in the Sky Saint Realm. Although there was a mysterious force behind him, the force behind him was hidden behind the scenes. It was impossible for them to send experts to help him. Zhuan's arrival was undoubtedly timely for the blood demon. Although Zhuan's strength was not bad, he was only in the arcane-shattering Saint Realm. Even if Zhuan's strength was comparable to the Sky Moon Saint Realm, there was still a large gap between him and the helpers brought by the other generals. Yao Lian's helper alone was in the Sun Sky Saint Realm. If the two of them worked together, the blood demon and Zhuan would be in danger. Not only Yao Lian, but the helper Qing Cong had brought was also in the Sun Sky Saint Realm. This was also why everyone had a strange expression when they discovered that the helper brought by the blood demon was only in the arcane-shattering Saint Realm. The blood general's name had been in the limelight recently. If the blood general could also find a helper from the Sun Sky Saint Realm, he would have a very high chance of becoming the commander-in-chief this time. But now, the helper he brought was too weak, so many martial artists around the square began to look down on the blood general. Mo Guang is also here. This guy's helper is also in the Sun Sky Saint Realm. The blood demon looked to the other side. There, a tall figure shrouded in black cheese slowly walked over. Beside him was another figure. This figure's aura was no weaker than Mo Guang's. He was also in the Sun Sky Saint Realm. In addition, most of the helpers brought by the other generals were in the Sun Sky Saint Realm. As for those below the Sky Saint Realm, most of them were ranked very low. They had neither strength nor connections. While the blood demon was sizing up the other generals were also sizing up the blood demon. In particular, Zhuan, who was beside the blood demon, attracted the most attention. There was no other reason. Zhuan's aura was only in the arcane-shattering Saint Realm. Many martial artists were puzzled by the fact that such a low-level martial artist was the helper of the famous blood general. It seems that the blood general is a little confused this time. He actually found trash to be his helper. There's no other way. The blood general has only been in office for a short time. How many people can he know? It's already very good that he could find an arcane-shattering Saint Realm helper. Many of the generals around began to talk, and many of them were mocking Zhuan. However, Zhuan turned a deaf ear to them. His gaze fell on the blood cauldron. Just now, the drop of yellow spring hidden in his body had begun to throb, and the source of the throb was the blood cauldron in the square. The massacre of the yellow springs finger creates the yellow springs through slaughter, and the yellow springs is the final destination of the dead. This blood cauldron has slaughtered countless living beings because of its sacrifice. Does this mean that the resentment in the blood cauldron can be absorbed by the yellow springs and become a part of it? Zhuan stared at the blood cauldron with a fiery look in his eyes. If his idea worked, he might be able to use the blood cauldron to raise the power of his massacre of the netherworld finger to a new level. Xiao He had once said that although the killing finger of Yellow Spring was an immortal technique with a very low threshold, its initial power was much weaker than ordinary immortal techniques. If he wanted to increase the power of the killing finger of Yellow Spring, he had to use slaughter to gather the water of the Yellow Spring to form the Yellow Spring. The larger the Yellow Spring was, the more terrifying the power of the killing finger of Yellow Spring would be. A bunch of ignorant people. Brother Mu, when the battle of the commanders comes, we will definitely stun these frogs at the bottom of the well, Blood Devil said to Zhuowen with an ugly expression. Don't worry, they will be slapped in the face, Zhuowen said unhurriedly. Looking at Zhuowen's appearance, Blood Devil could not help but recall the various scenes with Zhuowen in the past. He felt a chill in his heart. He knew very well how terrifying the willpower of the young man in front of him was and how deep his potential was. In the past, Blood Devil had witnessed the young man defeating the strong as the weak, and this time would not be an exception. Thinking of this, Blood Devil was slightly relieved. An uproar suddenly attracted the attention of Blood Devil and the others. On the other side of the square, a handsome young man in rock armor slowly walked out from the crowd. The young man had a white face and no beard. His black hair fluttered in the wind, and his whole body exuded a free and easy aura. Strangely, when the young man walked over, the surrounding people consciously made way for him. It was as if the handsome young man in rock armor was a demon that everyone feared. It's the first general, Shi Lai. Blood Devil's eyes narrowed, and his voice was filled with dread as he muttered in a low voice. Zhuowen's attention was on Shi Lai, and he nodded slightly. The aura that Shi Lai exuded was faintly discernible. However, with Zhuowen's eyesight, he could vaguely feel that this faintly discernible aura was probably hiding a terrifying power like that of a wild beast. Ding! Suddenly, Song Feng, who was standing beside Blood Cauldron, punched the cauldron again. His voice came from afar. The blood refining mansion has a total of 108 counties and 108 generals. At this moment, all the generals have arrived, and the 6 commanders have also arrived. Now, I invite the mansion master to attend. Song Feng's voice resounded in the sky along with the sound of the cauldron. The originally noisy square suddenly quieted down, and everyone's eyes were filled with awe. They knew that the mansion master of the blood refining mansion was about to appear. He stood at the pinnacle of the blood refining mansion and controlled the entire mansion's lifeline. Rumble! In the depths of the blood refining mansion, a terrifying sword essence suddenly shot up into the sky, and a dazzling sun gradually appeared. Is that the sun? No, that's not the sun. It's a treasured sword that emits the light of the sun. The golden light was so dazzling that many people in the square squinted their eyes. They could barely see the treasured sword hidden in the golden light. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The moment the blazing sun rose, another 8 blazing suns rose from the depths of the blood refining mansion. At this moment, 9 blazing suns rose into the sky. Surrounded by 9 blazing suns, a majestic figure walked through the air. When he stepped out, it was as if he was stepping on the 9 blazing suns. He looked like a god, a demon, a god. The 9 Suns Dao Sword, an earthly immortal sacred artifact. The first commander, who was squinting, suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze fell on the 9 blazing suns as he muttered to himself. Swoosh! Xue Henshin's speed was extremely fast. Stepping on the 9 blazing suns, he swept to the only seat on the 9th level of the Duga in the eastern part of the square. After that, Xue Hentian sat on his seat in a rather carefree manner. With a wave of his sleeve, the 9 Yangdao swords that had carried him all the way here let out 9 sword cries. Shortly after, their radiance dimmed as Xue Hentian kept them in his sleeve. Zhuowen's eyes lit up. With his eyesight, he was able to see that when Xue Hentian kept the 9 Yangdao sword, he secretly used an extremely powerful saint energy. It was as if he had forcefully kept the 9 Yangdao sword in his sleeve. Looks like Elder Fu was right. The 9 Yangdao sword does not belong to Xue Hentian. Otherwise, he would not have forcefully kept the 9 Yangdao sword when he was controlling it. you're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.